Well, good morning, everybody. This is Billy Trout with the Tennessee Department of Revenue's Taxpayer Services Division. We're here presenting our new business workshop and recording the same workshop as we go along here today. So on behalf of our Commissioner, David Garagano, and our staff and Taxpayer Services, we are very glad to have you with us. We have lots of people still joining us even as we speak. So we'll just begin with a few little housekeeping things here. On screen right now, we have Miss Katie Julian, who'll be walking us through a few things about the workshop here as we get going. And then I see Mr. Mitch Gibson available here as well. Mitch and Deirdre will be making presentations. Good morning, Deirdre, and Mitch as well. So glad to have everybody on board from our staff as well. We're going to be going through quite a bit of information in the next few hours. And Katie's going to point you to a few things to consider before we get going. And then I'll walk you through the first part after that. Okay, so Katie, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Billy. And thanks to all of you joining us today. CPAs, professionals, new business owners who have been in business for a little while, but just looking to get a little bit more information. We hope that we can help you out today. That's the goal of this, is to take some guesswork out of the state level taxes that you're going to be dealing with. So you see on the slide in front of you right now, just some technical stuff about if you have sound issues. Also, to let you know, there's a participant guide that will walk through each of our slides that we've got. The participant guide has live links, actual hyperlinks over to the resources that we're going to be referring to. You wouldn't be able to click on those links from your screen here in the WebEx, in the webinar, but in that PDF participant guide that you can link over to, I put a link to it in the chat. The hyperlinks there, you can actually click on and see the resources and stuff that we're talking about. We've got a lot of information. It's a 3-hour workshop today. We're going to take about a 10-minute break around a natural halfway point. So be on the lookout for that. Just want to let you know too, for those of you that are referencing this after maybe watching the video later, the links and the tax manual pages that we have in this presentation are subject to change. Usually the links won't change as often as those tax manual pages might as we update the manuals, which happens pretty frequently because things change, right? Did want to let you know too, a recording of this presentation is going to be posted on our website probably tomorrow, maybe later this afternoon, but definitely by tomorrow. And I have a link over in the chat to that as well. If you want to see a recording of this, you can check back later for that. Just to let you know too, I also put a little message in the chat. We are turning off the chat during the slide presentations throughout these sessions, but then we're going to have a few Q&A sessions where you can we'll open the chat back up for that, and then your chat messages will come directly to us panelists. And no way we'll be able to get to all the questions, but we'll get to as many as we can, and we'll share with you some ways to reach out to us to answer any questions that we don't get to today or that you might have in the future. So with that said, I'll go ahead and turn things back over to Billy here to present our first session.
Well, thank you, Katie. And again, we want to thank everybody for signing in. And we do have people still joining us. That'll be fine. They'll get caught up. But we want to, first of all, like Katie said in her intro too, we want to thank you guys for what you do for the state of Tennessee as business owners or potential business owners, or for people that help business owners in with their taxes or their accounting or whatever. You guys provide a extremely valuable resource, and our state operates because of entrepreneurs like you that keep things going for us. So we appreciate that, and we know that you're here today to learn and to do things right, and we're here to help you through that process. So as we go through this stuff today, I would encourage you to not be overwhelmed by anything that you might see, because there's a lot to know. Okay, but as we go a little bit further, you're going to be introduced into ways that you can get with the Department of Revenue so that we can help you through the process, and we'll give you some really good pointers along the way, and you'll pick up on these as we go. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the first part and kind of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about the steps to setting up your business. I'll go through some of that information with you here in just a few moments. And then we're going to talk about different kinds of state taxes, you know, your business tax and business licensing. There were some changes to that, and we'll be talking about that. Um, Sales tax, which touches quite a few businesses out there. And we'll touch on a few other taxes, not at depth, but to make you aware of them and where you can find out more information later on. Okay. And of course, at the end of the presentations today, probably maybe even more important than all the information is, where do I go to get help? Where do you find more information? Who can help me when I get confused? And you'll probably get confused if you're a new business owner because like I said before, it's just a lot. It's a lot to digest, and you guys are taking a great first step in attending the workshop today or viewing this presentation later on. So let's talk about a few things that we're doing here now. I guess it's been a few months now that we have set up a special page on our website, and the link is right here at the top, and you can see what that is. But um, we wanted to make sure that businesses had a one-stop place to try to get things going. Okay, so this link that's represented here on this page is a page that kind of lets you know about the steps to set up your business, about permits and the tax accounts and exemptions, et cetera, et cetera. You can read those there. But we think that's very helpful. We try to send out postcards to our new businesses that register with us that reference this website so that you guys can get started on the right foot too. Okay. Um, and I'll say it now because I want it to be said several different times today that, you know, when we do send out information, either to be helpful up front or to perhaps let you know that we have a problem about a filing that we didn't get or a payment we didn't get or something like that, please take that opportunity to reach out to us if you don't understand it. Okay, don't ignore these things, and we'll bring this up 2 or 3 different times today because it's so important to not let problems become more problems. Okay. So anyway, this is where you can go to get some new information about your new business. Okay, how you get going. So step one really is setting up the business correctly, and this is very important because tax registration at the Department of Revenue sort of drives everything else that we do uh, after that initial process is set up. So in other words, you can't file and pay your taxes properly unless you have the correct tax accounts. Okay. So if you have a restaurant that sells liquor and you're selling food and liquor in your restaurant, there's many different types of tax accounts that you need. Okay. You'll need a sales tax account. You'll need a business tax account. More than likely, you'll need a franchise and excise tax account, a liquor by the drink account, and the list goes on. So, as you can see, it gets a little weird, right? But still, you know, we can help you through all this kind of stuff. But some of the main things that we talk about here are on these bullets. Okay. And we say business structure. You know, what does that mean? Well, that means, are you a sole proprietor? Are you a partnership? Are you a corporation? Are you a single member LLC? Are you a multi member LLC? Or do you know what that even means? Okay. You may not, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. Okay. What is very, very important to you guys, and I'll tell you this now in case we forget to mention it again, is these very first steps out the door with your business are very important. Just because someone tells you that they think that you should set up an LLC, as an example, does not necessarily mean that's the best decision for you. Okay. So make sure that you're listening to advice and that you're researching and that you're reaching out for us. Now, we at the Department of Revenue will tell you what things are, but what we're not going to be able to do is to tell you if you should be a sole proprietor, if you should be an LLC or a corporation. This is something that you have to decide yourself. But when you make these decisions and you set them up and you register with the Secretary of State's office for an LLC or a corporation, then you are on the hook for some taxes. Okay. And what if you never do anything with the business, which is a very typical phrase that we hear a lot in taxpayer services? Well, you still have to pay a tax. And the minimum franchise and excise tax, as an example, is $100 a year. And you have to do that while you're open until you close your business down officially. So, super duper important to start off right. Okay. So that starts with the structure, and you'll decide what that is. And we have some documents on our website that will walk you through that as well, or we can help you understand more about what that is too. And don't forget our resources that we'll be talking about later on as well. So your business name and address is very, very important. We have to have a physical location for your business, where your business is located, books and records wise. Um, do not use a postal facility as your location address. That's not allowed. Okay. So if you have a post office box or you have an address at one of these stores that can receive mail for you, that's not your location address. Your location address is where your books and records are, which might be your home address as an example. Okay. Do you need to register with Secretary of State? You do if you are an LLC or if you are a corporation in the state of Tennessee. And that's very generic, but that's pretty much how that works. Okay. Do you need an EIN? First of all, what is an EIN? An EIN is an employer identification number. EIN. Okay. This number is obtained from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. Okay. You can go on their website at irs.gov and search for Federal Employer Identification Number and be taken to a section to where you can actually obtain one of these numbers. Now, you'll need one of these numbers typically if you have a corporation, and most of the time, unless you're a single member LLC, you'll need an EIN as well. What this is, it's the equivalent of a social security number for you as an individual. So it identifies your business, okay? You'll need it for filing your federal taxes, but we'll need it for our records as well in these cases where you are a corporation or a type of LLC that requires that. Okay. So not everybody needs an EIN. For instance, a sole proprietor, unless you have employees federally, you would need it for that purpose, but we don't need that. We just need your social security number. Okay. That's how that's set up. The start date of your business. When do you start? Okay. And that's kind of tricky if you think about it. So you're just thinking about starting a business now. Well, is that today? Are you really starting today? Are you going to start it a month from now? Again, these are your decisions. Okay, stuff that you need to think about. So think about what the start date means to you as you do register too. NAICS codes. Basically, NAICS codes, when you encounter these in registration with us on our TINTAP system, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find out, what does your business do? What kind of business are you in? Are you in construction? Are you a consultant? Are you a restaurant? That sort of thing. So you can actually type in the type of business it is, and it'll give you a list to choose from and pick the one that's best for you. This helps us statistically track where commerce is being conducted in Tennessee because our legislature wants to know that information at different times. Certain governmental agencies like to have that information so we can so they can put services in place, to the right businesses and different things like that, and follow cash flows. The thing that we want to point out on this is, in this registration process, the data that you share with us, your social security number, your addresses, and different things like that, we do protect this data. Okay. When you register with us, you'll find very quickly that you have to go through a process by which to sign into your account that allows you to set up unique things that don't allow others to access your information. We do not share information with personal information outside to you directly, or one of your authorized representatives who might have a power of attorney that you set up with us. But that doesn't happen very often. Not so many people use powers of attorney. So it's generally we're talking to you about your taxes, okay? And that's the only people we talk to about that. Fiscal tax year. So the most businesses will use a December year end. Okay, so if you file personal taxes with the Internal Revenue Service, you will already have set up your filing, obviously, with them like you always have, right? And you're going to file January through December, and it's always due on April 15th or around that date, right? Well, with us at the Department of Revenue, whatever tax year you follow is federally, we follow that as well. Okay. And typically this will be December. Okay. And that makes a lot of your taxes, like business tax, due on April 15th, and franchise and excise tax returns have different due dates and extended due dates as well too. But bottom line is, you can have an alternate fiscal year. Okay, there are seasonal businesses out there that that may have a different fiscal year end. For example, what if you are sort of a summertime business? What if you operate, let's say, a water park? Okay, so you have a water park and you're set up and you close out on Labor Day weekend every year. Maybe your fiscal year end is September. You know, you might set it up that way with the IRS and with us at Revenue. Something to think about. Okay. And directors, officers, and shareholders, we just need information through the registration process to know who the responsible parties are. Okay. And whoever that is, we just need their name and their email address, and social security numbers and things of that nature as well. Okay. So that pretty much covers that slide there. And like it says in the blue box, make sure to determine these factors before registering for accounts, and use the same for all the government agencies. So make sure you have all of your things in a row and you're ready to go before you start the registration. All right. So this is how this sort of broke out. And I kind of gave you this information already anyway, a lot of it. But for sole proprietors, you know, we just need that social security number. You can see where we need federal EIN numbers, single member LLCs, multi-member LLCs, and some of this other stuff down here too. Nonprofits, most of the time don't really have to be registered with the Department of Revenue unless your nonprofit is engaged in what they call unrelated business income. And what that means is that that nonprofit is sort of operating a business and making money just like a regular business would. This is sort of unusual. If that's the case, then there may be some taxation and registration required, but for the most part, we don't need to even register nonprofits. And in some cases, nonprofits make taxable sales for sales tax purposes too, so they may be on the hook for that. Anyway, we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure. Okay. So, how about a name? What's your business's name? You doing business, DBA, doing business as name. Okay. The Small Business Administration, or it says it's association, but I think it's administration. Anyway, SBA.gov is where you can find information about how to select your business's name. You want to be careful and not select a name that is being used by another business in your actual community. And that's detailed in the Secretary of State's business name availability database that's on that second bullet right there. And again, location, addresses, I already talked about this, so I already said that. Mailing address. Okay, guys, this is going to be super easy, but yet very important to understand. When you move, when you change your mailing address, you should let us know, okay? Because my fellow folks in taxpayer services will tell you of the hundreds of letters that we get back with bad addresses, Okay. Why is that? Because people moved. And we don't know where you moved until you tell us where you moved. Okay. So I know that sounds very simple, but it's super important to always let us know, and because we may need to reissue some documentation to you if your location has changed, and if we're trying to mail you something, there's usually a reason. So if you don't get that mailing, you're not going to know what we're trying to tell you. So it's very important too. And in the blue box, I already mentioned this, a business's location can't be a post office box because you're not located in a 3 by 5 inch box. It's not possible. Okay. You are where you are, and that's typically a physical address. Okay. There you go. Okay. Do you need to register with Secretary of State? And I won't read that to you, but you can see corporations, limited partnerships, LLCs, or business trusts must register with Secretary of State. Okay. And as it says, an underline, file annual reports. So, real quick here, if you are an LLC, as an example, and you're registered with the Secretary of State, they will charge you a fee to register. Okay. They will also charge you an annual fee when you file your annual report. Okay. This is separate and apart from the Department of Revenue. We do not charge fees for registration or for the filing of a return. Now, yes, there's taxes involved, but there's not a fee involved with that. But Secretary of State's office does. Okay, so don't get those mixed up. We're two different animals, so to speak, if you know what I mean. All right. And then, of course, we already talked about the EIN thing here, so I won't rehash that. But this does tell you about how that whole process works with the Internal Revenue Service. Okay. All right. And we talked about the start date thing. It's the date you officially begin. And if you've chartered with the Secretary of State prior to registering with the Department of Revenue, you need to use the effective date of the charter. Now, here's a helpful hint for you too. You can set up a delayed effective date with the Secretary of State. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how far out you can go on that, but typically we have this discussion with taxpayers that are beginning a business. Let's say it's December, okay, and they want to start a new business. Okay, do you want to start that on December 15th, or are you really going to start it January 1? That's really important. Because if you're really not going to make any money and quote start your business until January 1, then you've just saved yourself some tax money from having to file the required tax with us for the current year, even though it's only for like 2 weeks. Remember that minimum tax for franchise and excise tax is $100. So be smart, about that and try to get that in the way that you need it to go for you. Okay. Okay. So, and in that blue box, I really cannot overemphasize this. I think my taxpayer services folks would tell us the same thing. On sales tax, we have to have a return for every month or quarter or period, so to speak, while your business is open. That's to report even zero. Even if you have no sales, we have to know that every single filing period. Okay, and we have to have that by the 20th of the following month or the month that follows the period. Right. So if we don't, we'll send out an assessment letter and say you owe us hundreds of dollars that you really don't owe. And then if you don't let us know about this, and they keep sending out letters after letters after letter after letter after letter, then these assessments stack up, they go to collections, and all kinds of ugliness happens. So don't let that happen to you. Okay. Be smart and file. Even if you have zero to report, just jump into TINTAP and do that. Katie, you want to say something about that as well?
Yeah, Billy, I'm just going to reiterate this, especially with sales tax accounts. It's common if you're going to be selling tangible personal property that you're going to want to register for that sales tax account in advance of when your start date is for your business because you want that resale certificate so you can buy products that you're going to be reselling without having to pay tax on those products, right? So you think, okay, I got to stock my shelves. I've got to stock my business. I need this sales tax account because I need that resale certificate. But just so you know, as soon as you get that and you have your sales tax account registered for, like Billy said, you are on the hook, and it's so easy to go in and just file zero. Let's say you're starting right now with your sales tax account. You go in there and register for it. You need that resale certificate. What is today? The 12th of July. That would put you on the hook for owing sales tax for July, but you're not selling anything, right? So you'd go in sometime before the next month on the 20th and just, it's a simple question through TinTap, which we'll talk about this later, but it says, do you have any gross sales to report? You click no and next and submit, and you're good. You're good. Like Billy said, if you were to not do that, though, you're just thinking, I haven't sold anything yet. I haven't collected any sales tax that I need to remit to the state. I'm just buying my stuff. I'm just stocking my shelves. I'm just starting up. If you were to not go in there and say zero sales this month, next month, the month after, like Billy said, you're going to get a letter from us that says, you didn't file. And that letter will turn into another letter, which will create an assessment, like you said, and it can get messy. So the advice there is if you start that sales tax account, make sure you go ahead and mark your calendar, put a reminder on your phone till it becomes second nature just to go in and file zero until you actually have anything to report.
That's exactly right. 100%. So you guys will be on doing that correctly and won't have any problems. By the way, I would say that once you get your username and password set up on TinTap and everything lined up, if you were filing zero on your sales tax returns, I would imagine it wouldn't take you more than a minute and a half to get that whole thing done every month. So fast. Okay. Even when you're filing actual figures, it's not really taking you that long either. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. Okay. So with that, let's go to the next slide here and talk about these NAICS codes. Again, not really that big of a deal for us. We're just trying to categorize your business so statistically we can track what your business does, and just basically put that in more or less the whole set of data from all our businesses in Tennessee and be able to extract that out as needed. We're not necessarily looking at your particular figures or anything unless you were, of course, being audited, and that doesn't happen that often. But anyway, we're looking at this from a very high level type of thing too. We already talked about fiscal year and what that means, and this is what it means in writing. About calendar year versus fiscal year. And again, most of you are going to be on calendar years too. And identifying those key people in your business in the registration process is very important for us. And then, of course, the next step is to kind of look at some other things here that we haven't really talked about that might affect your business. And one of the main ones here at the very top is business licenses. And business licenses are issued by county clerks and city recorders across our state. And you need a business license, and I think we'll go through this in great detail soon, but just to let you know, if your business has $3,000 or more, you're going to need a business license for that county. And if you live in a city where there's business tax, and there's well over 220, probably 230 cities that have business tax as well, you'll need a license from them. To each license, the initial license costs $15, but we're going to talk more about that in great detail later on. Chartering your business and registering with Secretary of State, we already talked about. Federal ID number, we talked about. Unemployment insurance. Okay. So when you have employees, in many cases, you're required to register with the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. That's a lot of words, but they have a website so that you can get set up on a program called TNPAWS. That's TNPAWS. Again, TNPAWS. And once you're registered there, you'll be told how you can remit that money to them as required, depending on your payroll and stuff like that. Professional licenses, there are certain professions that require licensing, like contractors and insurance agents and other people that you see here listed. There's a lot of other professions that are also subject to that we're not listing here too. But on Commerce and Insurance's website, you can find out more information about that too. Now, not every business requires a professional license, but some do. We also have a professional privilege tax that applies to a very, very small number of business types out there, and we have that listed on our website as well. Alcohol. If you're selling liquor, you have to be registered with the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission, pay fees to them as well. And then, of course, along with that, we have to set you up accounts like could be liquor by the drink account is the main one that I'm thinking about, but there's some other taxes that apply to certain producers of alcoholic beverages and things like that too. We probably won't get too deep in the weeds on that today for a new business workshop, but there's lots of information on our website. We have a special unit that deals with alcohol tax and tobacco tax and things like that, and they specialize in stuff and they can help you as well. Then, of course, in bold, we put the thing about tax. And tax accounts means really, we're the taxing people. We're the Department of Revenue, right? And we're not the IRS. I bring that up and I'm sort of smiling and laughing at the same time because there's so many people that think the IRS and the Department of Revenue are the same thing. We're not. We're the state, okay? The IRS is federal, all right? That's apples and oranges, okay? We're very glad to help you understand anything you don't understand about that, but we're interested in the state part of it. Okay. All right. So to hit these major types of taxes at a very high level here too, business tax being a gross receipts tax. And it's a very small percentage, by the way. Each business for business tax owes way less than 1% the way our law is set up. So it's a super small tax. If you have a small business and you're not generating a lot of gross receipts, you're not going to pay very much business tax. And then of course it talks about the fact that if you're conducting business or you have a location in a county or a city in Tennessee, you're going to need that license, which means you have to be registered with us as well. If you have over $100,000 of income, and we're going to talk about that in business tax in a few minutes too. But what's interesting about that is that the business tax and the business licensing laws affect most businesses, because most businesses at least need a business license. Okay, and that's whether you sell goods or if you provide services. Okay. So unless the business is exempt, like let's say a doctor or a lawyer or a CPA or somebody like that, they're exempt from business tax and business licensing. But most other businesses are not exempt and they need the license, and in certain cases need to pay this tax as well. For sales tax, the sale of tangible personal property and a very few services. And we're going to talk about that also a little bit later. And the seller is liable for remitting the tax. That's you. You would be the dealer, the person that's actually selling the product. Okay. So whether you collect it from the customer or not, you're responsible for the sales tax. All right. Franchise and excise tax, you can see that applies to the corporations and the partnerships or certain, well, actually not really partnerships in general, certain types of like limited partnerships, LLCs, business trusts, and them. And other taxes, we've got liquor by the drink and tire tax and tobacco tax and several others too that we won't be able to get to every one of these today. There's almost 30 different kinds of tax in the state of Tennessee. So it really takes a lot to kind of get your head around that. We'd be talking for a long time if we touched every one of those. So we talked about some exemptions here. And then again, this is part of that landing page that we were directing you to earlier. You'll see this as you go through different stuff. We want to make sure that businesses know that some businesses are exempt from certain things like business tax on manufacturers. If you're selling from that manufacturing location or a location that is very near your manufacturing location, which is a new law change, then you don't have to pay business tax or have a business license. Religious and charitable entities that sell donated items are exempt from business tax as well. And there's some services that are just exempt from business tax. So we want to make sure that everybody knows if they qualify for an exemption for any of these taxes, that you should either not register or that you should exempt out particular things. And we'll talk about that a little later as well too. And a great example here is with sales tax, the next section here too. There are entity-based exemptions. There are just people that don't have to register for sales tax. They're not required to under the law. There's product-based exemptions. The product themselves are exempt, like textbooks. If you were to buy textbooks, they're exempt from sales tax in Tennessee. And then use-based exemptions are just based on how you use it, and we can talk more about that as well. And then with franchise and excise tax, I promise you we're not talking about 17 types of exemptions today, okay? But they're out there. As a matter of fact, we have recorded webinars out there on these exemptions that can be really helpful to you. So if you're interested in those, like family operated businesses, what we call FONCE, FONCE, so many others, if you qualify for an exemption, we want you to have it. We want you to do it. But there's some very precise situations sometimes, particularly in franchise and excise tax, where you have to follow the law and make application for the exemption on a timely basis in order to get the exemption. So just keep that in mind and make sure you're educated on that, okay? So the good old TNTAP, to the Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point. This is where you go online to obtain your tax account. And then later on, once you obtain your tax accounts, you register with a username and password and you file and pay through that. But, we talk about the fact that this is kind of like online banking. Most of us will use online banking, It's been very, very popular. It's a good way to know where your finances are, if you're being charged right and all that. This is what TNTAP does. So you can go out there and look and see, am I good? Did I send this in properly? Did I get penalized? How do I abate a penalty, or, different things like that. So, so super important to do. And of course, the fourth bullet on here, when your business closes, close the business on TNTAP, and you can do that. Okay. You can close the business down, and then you're done. Now, let me say this. We encounter this quite often too. If you close a business, let's say you close a business. I'm closing my business today, and it's the 12th of July, okay? And I'm registered for sales tax. Well, I closed my business, so I don't have to file anymore, right? Guess what? Not true. You have to file for July. Just because you closed in the middle of July doesn't mean you don't have to send us anything for July. We have to have that final tax return. We have to have that very last one, that very last business tax return, that very last franchise and excise tax return. So super important to do there too. Okay. Very good. And those of you posting stuff in chat, we're not touching that right now. Is that right, Katie?
Well, I thought we'd have a little period of time now where we can have some Q&A before we move on to the next section, which is some details about the tax accounts, specifically business tax and sales tax. We've got a little bit of time here that we can take some questions. I just put in the chat, if you've got specific questions about tax accounts, we are going to hold those for a little while because we may be getting to those topics here in a few minutes for you, and then we'll have another Q&A chat session after we talk specifics about tax accounts.
Right.
So
And just to understand too that we're not going to be talking about your personal tax account on this session because that's never going to happen. That's your personal data. And we'll refer you to how to send us an email about specific account issues that you might be having later. We want to help you, but doing it publicly is not a thing. We are very serious about your data privacy and that, and we're very keyed in on that. So understand that too. Do we have any other chat things that people have put out here, Katie?
a few questions about, is there a recording? Is this session going to be recorded? The answer to that is yes. And if you scroll up in the chat, I have a link to where you can reference a recording of today's workshop later today or tomorrow. Let's see here. A few questions about
That's a great
specific
question.
tax.
Matt asks, can I obtain the city county license for the first time by going through TINTAP, or do I have to go to the local courthouse / clerk's office?
Okay, Dan. Yeah. So the answer to that is your initial license you have to get at the county or the city. Okay. Now you can register with us through the TINTAP system and set up, let's say, a business tax account, which will we will let the county and the city know that you have set up a registration request. And then what you would do at that point, if you go through us first, you would need to go to the county or city or somehow talk to them on the phone, say, hey, I owe you $15. I registered already. How do you want me to come down? Do you want me to come down there? Do you want me to mail you a check? What do you want? And that's up to the different cities and counties too. So yeah, that's a fine question and one that happens every day. So thanks for bringing that up.
Here's a good question from Alejandra. If someone registered for sales tax, but they never sold anything, once it is filed for zero and closed out, do they still owe late filing for this? Great question. If the zero filings were not filed timely, so if you realized it a couple months too late and you went back and you filed zero did that, you are going to accrue penalty. There wouldn't be any interest on that because there's no filing, it's zero, but there is a penalty that will accrue. You can apply for a penalty waiver through TINTAP, and it's a pretty easy process. It's not guaranteed, but usually those are approved, especially for these in this type of situation, just generally speaking. But yeah, so to answer your question, there would be a late filing penalty if you didn't file that zero on time. I hate to see that come about. That's just painful for me when I see someone stuck with a penalty fee for they never sold anything. But that's where when we were talking about once you open up that sales tax account, just know that floodgate open and you are responsible at that point for going in and at least filing zero timely.
Yeah, right. And Katie, honestly, this happened last week to me. I was helping a taxpayer and glad to do it because, hey, we get paid to help people and that's fine, no problem. But this person had a year and a half worth of assessments on sales tax. That means 18 months. That means we sent out 18 letters saying you're late. You be better than that. Okay. In other words, after your first letter or two, you should realize that you have a problem. Okay. Don't let problems stack up. I tell a funny story about a while back, a taxpayer and I were talking and they said, well, I got something from the state and I didn't know what it was, so I threw it away. Don't throw away things that the government sends you. If you got a letter from the IRS, would you throw that away? I hope not. You should open it and look at it, right? So make sure you do that. Super important, and it's sort of funny and sort of not, just making sure that you're being diligent about what you're doing is very important.
I understand hating paper mail. When I go to the mailbox every day and I see there's a bunch of letters, and I'm like, oh, most of this is probably junk. I'll just assume. But another great reason to make sure that you are on TINTAP, we encourage, we'll talk about this later too, every business owner, even if you have someone that deals with all this stuff for you, you've got an accountant or an administrative person that handles all your tax stuff, we encourage every business owner to have their own TINTAP access so that you can just have that bird's eye view of all of your tax accounts. Make sure that that CPA is filing it, or make sure that everything looks right and that there's no alert on the account. There's no, red exclamation point on anything. The other thing is you can view all of your letters that we have sent you on TINTAP. So if you're bad about your mail and and you shred mail and you don't read everything carefully, at least you know that you're getting that you can get access to any letters from us through TINTAP electronically. So check that periodically just to make sure.
And when you don't understand something, that's fine. It's no sin to not understand something. Trust me. Katie and and others have joked before, before we became employees of the Department of Revenue, ever how many years ago that was that ever our life's goal to work for the Department of Revenue? Were we highly trained tax experts in state tax? Let me assure you, no, absolutely not. We learned pretty much everything we learned by being here, and when you're in it every day, it's easier, right? But when you're in it, when you're out there trying to make money in your business, that's your job, is to make money and to put the details of taxation away for another time, but still importantly, going back to them and looking at what you're supposed to be doing to make sure that you're in compliance and that you're not paying the government any extra money in interest and penalty. That's annoying, and we don't want you to do that. We honestly don't want you to have to pay extra money. Truly. Okay.
And we're going to be sharing a lot of resources today and links in the PDF for this. Our goal, and I think we do a pretty good job at it here at the Tennessee Department of Revenue, is to put as much information out there for you as possible. Would it be great if you could just go on our website and find the exact answer that you're looking for? Well, we work on that every day. The manuals that we link to throughout this presentation, our revenue help articles, our tax pages, we're going to try to answer your questions. And then if not, we're here. We're going to share with you later our phone number for our call center. Mitch and Deirdre are managers in our call center. Unless it's tax due date, you can get a person on the phone in our call center pretty immediately, or send us a help ticket, an email, submit a ticket on our website. But the goal is to have as much information in our manuals and on our website as possible. None of us really like to have to make a call, right? But do it. If you can't find the answer that you need that's specific to your business, I do see some questions in here that are specific to certain types of businesses. If we don't get around to answering some of those today that aren't really general questions, send us an email or see if you can find it in our manuals. If you don't want to search through them, we'll show you later how to search the manuals, and you may find the exact answer that you need just a click away.
All right. Well, is there anything else we need to talk about right now?
I think that there's several questions in here about tax accounts that I think we'll kind of hold off for now on those and go
Okay.
ahead and start talking about the tax accounts. I'll move into that, and then we'll take a little break in a little while. But so for the time being, we're going to turn off the chat again while we talk more about these tax accounts. All right. Let's see. Can y'all see my next slide here?
I see that you're on business tax, Katie.
Perfect. All right, great. Well, so I saw something interesting the other day on the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development's website that pretty exciting. Tennessee ranked number 3 in CNBC's America's Top States for Business. Took a lot of things into effect, attributes such as workforce, infrastructure, but this was the thing, cost of doing business. So a cost of doing business in the state is paying some taxes, right? We don't have a state income tax. So all of our revenue, most of our revenue is going to come from these taxes. And like Billy said earlier, business tax is a very, very tiny, small rate. But it is going to affect a good number of businesses in the state. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But like sales tax, for example, sales tax, over 60% of our revenue in Tennessee comes from sales tax. That falls on all of us. If you live here in this state, whether you run a business or not, you're going to pay sales tax. You're going to pay it probably if you left your house right now and went and bought something. like Billy said earlier, it applies to most things and some services. But here's the thing about the business when it comes to sales tax. The business is just collecting it and then handing it over. They're not paying it. The consumer is paying that. But a burden does fall on the business for actually collecting it and then sending it in. But business tax is one of those taxes that I will say too, it's different than franchise excess tax. A lot of people that are new business owners think those business tax is F&E tax. It's not. It's its own thing. We'll talk just a minute here about it. Like Billy said, big change happened this year in our state legislature that changed the threshold for what is required for filing. So let's look at this graphic here. The far left-hand side is your gross sales annually. If you make under $3,000, there's no business license required, no business tax requirement. So since there's no license, there's no renewal. It's basically just a hobby, right? If you're making between 3,000 and 100,000, this is a big change right here. This threshold used to be between 3 and 10,000, but now, as you see, between 3 and 100,000, you'll need a minimal business license. You are not required to pay business tax if you make between 3 and 10,000 gross sales. You'll just renew that minimal license directly with the clerk. With this new threshold, any business that makes over 100,000 in gross sales annually will need to obtain a standard business license and will be required to file business tax. And then filing that business tax return every year, we send information to the local jurisdictions, to the city clerks and the county clerks to let them know, hey, yeah, this person filed and paid, they're good to go. Hey, clerk, you can renew their license now. There are some special rules for contractors and out-of-state businesses. We'll touch on that just a little bit, but more about this new threshold, since you may be a new business that just registered in the past few months, went down to the clerk's office, got your license. Getting word out about this to all the different clerks, the cities and counties. This is something we're going through right now with the Department of Revenue. The law just passed a couple months ago. You may have obtained a standard business license from your clerk back when the law hadn't passed yet, or there's miscommunication about it with the clerks or something. If that's the case, just so you know, you will not be required to file business tax unless you meet that 100,000 threshold in gross sales. Administratively here at the Department of Revenue, we're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to look, whether we send you a letter to let you know what's going on, or whether you go into your TINTAP account and see that you don't need to file. Be on the lookout for that. But just so you know, over 100,000 in gross sales, very important. That's the new threshold. A standard business license is required, and business tax will be required. So who is subject to business tax? Again, in-state businesses with gross sales over 100,000, in-state contractors with gross sales of over 100,000 in the city that they're based in, which we refer to as their domicile. And that's per jurisdiction. So if you're a contractor that has a total of over 100 in the city that your business is based in, you're subject to business tax. For in-state and out-of-state contractors with gross sales over 100,000 in any other jurisdictions that you're not based out of, then you will also need, you'll be liable for business tax. We do have industry-specific guidance. We're not going to go into specifics about contractors today, but we have a great whole section in our business tax manual. If you've got the PDF open right now, you can click on that BT manual link right there. We also have a webinar that we recorded that's specific for contractors, business tax for contractors. Out-of-state businesses, if you've got Nexus in Tennessee, are engaged in activities that are subject to business tax and have gross receipts over 100,000 or more in a jurisdiction, you are liable for business tax. And again, we have a great webinar that touches on Nexus for out-of-state businesses. That'll touch on various different taxes, sales tax, business tax, F&E. But if you're an out-of-state business and you're with us today or viewing this recording, this link to the webinar we've got there is great. And each of our tax manuals, the sales tax manual, the business tax manual, the F&E manual, will also touch on whether or not you've got nexus in Tennessee and are liable for taxes. Who is not subject to business tax? Casual and isolated sales, gross receipts under 100,000. There are some services that are exempt from business tax: veterinary services, medical services. More information about that in our business tax manual. There, the pages are listed where you can find exactly which services are exempt. Now, I will repeat, those are services that are exempt. And an example I like to use there is, okay, I just mentioned veterinary services are exempt from business tax. Well, if you are a veterinary office that obviously provides services, those services are not subject to business tax. But if you sell other things outside of those services, like pet food or leashes, pet toys, now those sales would be subject to business tax. There are some entities that are exempt from business tax. More details about those in our business tax manual, pages 105 through 118. Entities such as radio and television stations, qualified manufacturers, and more. As an entity, they're excluded from business tax. There are some sales that are exempt from business tax, very few. There's a few pages of those sales that are in our manual. Certain agricultural sales, certain qualified amusement activities, wholesaler to wholesaler sales, that kind of thing. Certain sales are exempt from business tax. But generally speaking, if you make over 100,000 and don't fall into one of these exempt categories, you're on the hook for business tax in Tennessee. This is a slide that really just gives you a basic overview of business tax. It's hard to put it all on one slide, but I tried here, and I'm giving you some resources to find out more about each of these items. So business tax, it's your gross sales times a certain rate. There are some deductions and credits, and which results in the tax due. So let's break this down just piece by piece. Gross sales. What are gross sales? All sales derived from products or services. Now, you'll hear a business say, well, I didn't make any money. That would mean maybe they didn't net anything after their overhead. They paid the rent, employees. They didn't net per se a certain amount. But if you gross, which is all sales derived from the products or services, if you gross over 100,000, then you're subject to business tax, and that is the amount that you would put on line 1 of your business tax return is the gross sales. How to determine gross sales? There's a link to our business tax manual here. Got pages 34 through 44 and how to determine gross sales, some details there. So you multiply those gross sales by a tax rate. What is that tax rate? It's going to be based on what classification you are and whether you're predominantly a retailer or a wholesaler. So when you register, when you go to, if business tax is going to pertain to you, so for a business grossing over 100,000, when you go get that standard business license from the city or county, you're going to have to determine your classification. The classification is going to be based on your business's dominant business activity. Our legislature has determined that there are 5 different classifications certain businesses are going to fall within. I'm going to share with you in just a minute where you can see a page that breaks down those classifications on our business tax page, but also there's some details in our manual, pages 45 through 50, about what classification. And when we say dominant sales, if you're a business that sells lots of different things, I like to use the example of Cracker Barrel. It's a restaurant, it's a retailer. They sell different types of things. They sell clothing, they sell candles, they sell, well, when it comes to determining what their gross, what classification they're going to fall into, it's what their dominant sales are based on. And then the whole rate for their business tax is going to be that rate. When you go to file business tax, so not when you register for business tax or your license, you don't have to determine at that point whether you're a retailer or wholesaler. But the rate is going to be slightly different depending on if you are a retailer or a wholesaler. A link there to more information about that. The businesses have to determine whether they're in the business of making retail sales or wholesale sales. The determination of whether a business is a retailer or wholesaler is made on a location by location basis. And it's important because the business tax rate differs for retailers and wholesalers just slightly. Generally, a business is a retailer if at least 50% of their taxable gross sales are retail sales, and they're a wholesaler if more than 50% are wholesale sales. So it's pretty simple to determine that. And again, you're not required to choose whether you're a retailer or wholesaler till it's time to file. Yes, Billy.
Maybe one thing to point out here is that everything you just said was right, except for maybe just say that some of the different businesses only have one rate and not a retail or a wholesale rate. One thing we get a lot of questions about are contractors. They have a one rate. We call it the quote retail rate. And you're thinking, well, what is a contractor selling at retail? They're just doing stuff. But anyway, it's the same equivalent rate. It's 1/10 of 1%. Again, 1/10 of 1%, super small, but that applies to everything a contractor does. And there's a few other classifications that just have a retail rate and not a wholesale rate. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And in the business tax manual, pages 124 through 135, I'm sorry, pages 59 through 63, there'll be more details about whether you're a retailer or a wholesaler. So there are a few deductions and credits with business tax, not too many, which simplifies things, right? Deductions will reduce the tax liability, reduce the amount of your income before you calculate the tax you owe, and credits can reduce the amount of tax you owe. An example of a deduction is returned merchandise sales in interstate commerce, which means a product is delivered outside of the state of Tennessee, not that it's purchased here, but delivered outside of the state. For contractors, amounts that you pay to subcontractors can be a deduction. Credit is given for amounts paid in tangible personal property tax. There is a line on your business tax return that is for that tangible personal property tax. It's going to be owed annually to the assessors, your local assessor's office, and that's based on that's different than your real property tax. That tangible personal property tax is based on the stuff that your business owns. You'll pay that locally, like I said, but then there is a credit that will give you on your business tax return up to no more than 50% of your tax liability. More information on deductions and credits there, but again, they're pretty simple. After you've determined that rate and whether you're a retailer or wholesaler, you're just going to, for the most part, usually put gross sales in line one. The tax return on TNTAP will walk you through and ask you, do you have any deductions? If you want to look at those just to see if you do when you're filing your return and click yes, I do, and you look and see, well, maybe none of these do apply to me. That's okay. You can still just put nothing there, but more information on those in the manual there. All right, so that's going to result in a tax due, right? You're going to owe some business tax. That tax is going to be due on the 15th day of the 4th month following your fiscal year end. Like Billy mentioned earlier, it's common for a business's fiscal year end to be December 31st. If that is the case, that looks a lot like the 15th day of the 4th month is April 15th, unless that falls on a weekend. So more information in our manual about business tax filing. And then we've got a couple of great videos here. There's a webinar about filing the business tax return, a link to that if you've got the PDF. And we've got a help video, a TNTAP help video that will walk you through also filing the business tax return. So, Mitch, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I had seen a couple of questions earlier in the chat specifically about how to renew a business license. And this process on the screen is how you renew your business license. Okay, so I just wanted to echo that. I know that's probably been mentioned in the past, but we get a lot of confused taxpayers stating that getting a license and filing that return are two separate things. They're not, they're the same. And so Just wanted to reiterate that.
And that, yes, Mitch, for sure, for a standard license. Now, again,
Correct.
for a minimal license, you're going to go just directly to your clerk. And again, this threshold has changed. I brought this slide back up just to reiterate this. But like Mitch just said, for standard business licenses, when you file your business tax return, honestly, it doesn't automatically renew your license. It's not in a snap. What we do is send information to your local clerk saying, hey, this business filed and paid business tax, and then that local clerk will issue that renewed license to you.
Correct.
That is how you do it. That's how you renew a standard business license, is file the return. So that is a brief and very basic overview of business tax. I think what we'll do here is I'm going to open up the chat. We'll take a 10-minute break. Let me go ahead and open up the chat right now. We'll take a 10-minute break and come back, get to some of your business tax questions, and then we'll move on to sales tax. So it's 9:35 Central Time. We'll come back here at 9:45 Central Time and go over some business tax questions that you might have. We'll see you at 9:45. All right, welcome back, everyone. I meant to share with you before we went to break a few resources on our website. So on your screen right now, you'll see our website. I'm going to take you back to our homepage, tn.gov/revenue, and show you where some really important business tax resources are. The first place I'm going to take you is our general tax page. So you're going to click on either taxes here in the top thing here, or you can click on the taxes tile. It takes you to the same place. Click on the taxes tile, and you can see here, Billy mentioned earlier, we have 30 different taxes or so. This is just the main, these are the main ones right here. We're going to click on business tax. Again, most common taxes are business tax, F&E, and sales tax. Click on the business tax page. And everything that I just mentioned to you in those few slides, giving you a brief overview, can be found, some more details about that can be found on this business tax landing page. You're going to see information about due dates and tax rates, registration and licensing, classifications. Like I said, we've got 5 different classifications. You click on the drop down under each one to see what's listed as classifications there. Very specific information on retailer, wholesaler, deductions, exemptions, and credits. Under tax guidance, this is something you'll see under each of our tax pages, tax guidance. That'll take you to a link over to where the tax manual is. Again, in the PDF for today's presentation, I'll link you directly over to this page too. But some other tax guidance there, important rulings and so on and so forth. Forms. Filing is required online, but if you want to look at a paper return, you can look at that here. So we're going to go into tax guidance. Actually, instead of clicking on the tax manual from here, I'm going to show you real quick another way you can get over to that tax manual. Let's go back to the top to our revenue homepage, and under tax resources, and then click on tax guidance. From there, you would click on tax manuals, and you'll see all of our different tax manuals here. We'll click on the business tax manual, and into the manual you can see prior versions. This was updated very recently due to all the new laws and the new threshold. But let's click into that business tax manual. It's a PDF, 172 pages you can see here. Scroll down just a little bit, you can see in the table of contents, you can click directly on a section by clicking on it in the table of contents here. Just so you see how it's structured, there's an introduction, some basic stuff about business tax, who is subject to business tax, registration and licensing. Scroll down here, determining gross sales, classifications, just a little bit more detail than what you're going to find on that tax page. The tax manual, I'll tell you, internally within the Department of Revenue, ever since our audit division created these wonderful tax manuals, this is our reference guide too for all things taxes. It'll reference the TCA, the law, or the revenue rule that's related to the various topics. Just going down a little further here to show you sourcing and distribution, exemptions and exclusions. Here's a big section about those exempt sales, persons or entities that are excluded from business tax, which sales are excluded, information about deductions, credits, industry-specific guidance. This is where I pointed you to for contractors, agricultural industry, specific guidance, so on and so forth. Just a really great resource here. If you aren't aware of this already, when you're searching on any web page or specifically here in this PDF, if you click Control F and then type in a word, Nexus, let's just see. We've got 42 instances of the word nexus. So if you're looking for a certain word, whether it's a word that's related to the question you have or the industry that you're in or the topic that you want a little bit more guidance in, it's one good way to search this document is to type in the word and then just see what comes up, and you can click on the link there. so on and so forth. So back to the top of the homepage again, revenues homepage. Another resource I'm going to show you real quick is Revenue Help. That's the questions tile here. Articles on lots of different subjects. Mitch here in a little while is going to go over TINTAP with you, but let's click on the taxes section. You can see here lots of different tax questions here. I'm going to click on business tax just to show you all the different questions. There are 74 help articles specifically about business tax. Again, you can type a topic into your search bar here. If you have a question, you've looked on the tax page, you've looked in the manual, you're here on in a help article, like I said, you can always call us. If you want to send us a question though, via email, if you go down to the bottom and click on submit a request, that is those questions will come directly over to a special group in our division that answers tax questions. Billy.
Yeah, Katie, I was just going to point out too that some of these pre-done answers on some of the business tax things need to be redone because of the new law change. There may be something, a couple of these things are maybe not exactly accurate at this moment, but we're working on it. The
Right.
manual is right. The manual has been updated and some of our information is updated as well. And we'll get to it. I just wanted to let you know as of the time that we're recording this today and presenting that there may be a few things that are sort of a mismatch there.
Right.
And just going back to revenue support, yeah, some of you in chat have talked about having like difficult questions or account related questions that you want help with. What you want to do is either call us if you want to talk to people that are a little more, or deal with people rather that are a little more I guess trained and have been around a little bit longer. You might consider the email option because we have more of our senior staff in that area. So if it's sort of a tricky issue, you might go email. And just saying, not to discount anything that Mitch and Deirdre's folks do on the phones. They're fantastic. They do a great job every day. But sometimes these issues are kind of tough and they need to be dug into a little bit. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
I'm going to show you one more time. Yeah, thanks, Billy. How to submit those questions. Again, I'm at the revenues homepage here. Click on questions and then submit a request here at the bottom. It's a quick little form you fill out and then you're able to submit your request right there. Submit a request. So that just points you to some of our resources. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. And I've been talking, so I'm not seeing all the questions that are coming in there, y'all. Mitch, Dan, Deidre, Billy, if y'all want to bring up any questions specific to business tax that have come up, are there any in the chat that are general questions that would apply to most people that we can go through?
I'll bring up one, Katie. I see somebody here has said they had several clients who don't make $100,000 annually. Do they have to file business tax? The answer is no, legally no. But if they've already been registered with a standard business license because they had previously paid business tax, what the department is going to be doing is we're going to be analyzing and deciding how we're going to handle that. In other words, what we don't want people to do is to pay tax that don't owe it, obviously, right? With the new law change, I mean, why would we have somebody pay a tax they don't owe? Of course not. So what we have to do is figure out, okay, are we going to send out a letter to these people and say, hey, looks like you're under the $100,000 threshold. So we have converted your account over to just a license only account. And then you just need to go to the local county clerk or city and get your license. Or do we have to make the taxpayer make that decision themselves? Because some taxpayers, believe it or not, some taxpayers want to have a standard license or would rather deal with us rather than going down to the clerk's office. That's true, but we have not decided how we're going to do that yet. Okay, but we will be letting everybody know exactly what happens as we figure out exactly what's best for our taxpayers out there. And Dan, I see you've rung in too. What would you like to say, sir?
Yeah, I've got a really good question from Ms. Shoulders, and I want to preface again that this business license change is very new to us, so we may have we may have questions that we don't have answers to yet, but we'll be getting answers as soon as we possibly can. But her question is, I obtained a standard business tax license about 3 months ago, but my business isn't opening for another week. So even though I have a standard license, if I do not meet the $100,000 or more threshold, then I do not have to pay the business tax. Is that correct? What do you think the answer is to that, Billy? If they have a standard business license, I would anticipate that they would have to pay the tax even though they didn't make $100,000. Am I wrong?
Whoa, okay. Well, sort of yes and no. How's that for an answer? That sounds like a government answer, doesn't it? So, no, seriously, we need to think about how we're going to deal with folks in that position. We in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many others, is this taxpayer who has registered and now is not subject to the tax under the new law should not pay this tax. Now, how do we get there? What do we do to do that? Is that something that Mr. or Mrs. Taxpayer needs to do? Or is that something that the Department of Revenue does for the taxpayer preemptively to prevent the tax from assessing? One way or the other, I promise you, we're going to get it all figured out. And we're not acting like we don't know what we're doing, believe it or not, because we've been in meetings about this kind of stuff, but it's sort of complicated. And I'm not going to bore you with all the weird details about the ifs, ands, and buts, but it's been a very interesting discussion. And we have literally hundreds of thousands of business tax accounts. And we have to be doing this in a smart way so that our friend Mitch here that just popped on and his call center people don't go absolutely nuts with a bunch of calls that we generated because we didn't write a letter right, or we didn't do something, or we didn't think about something. So yeah, we'll definitely be fixing that up. So be looking for a good solid answer for that in the next month or two. Okay. And I'm sorry to be vague on that, but I want to be very honest about that too. Okay.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback on top of Billy, obviously it's going to generate a lot of questions to this specific topic. Our team we're here to help and try to provide, the best answers that we have to the questions you have. So give us a call anytime that you have a question. We did have one question that popped up in the chat. I guess I would direct this to Billy since you referenced this earlier. It's specific to 10 Paws. Jody said, not a tax question, but can you touch on the unemployment insurance again? Would you recommend that she or any other taxpayer that has questions about 10 Paws just to reach out to the Department of Labor and Workforce?
100%. Absolutely.
Okay.
Because we don't deal with that. And that's not like bailout, don't bother us. But here's the thing. If we don't administer it, we don't know about it. We can't
Correct.
tell you how to really get deep into that. Just like we wouldn't, touch on other agencies and what they do. Like we can't help you issue a driver's license or get a new license because we don't do that. But at the same time, we're very glad to tell you, either through Mitch and Deirdre's folks in the call center or my folks on email or wherever, say, hey, you know what? You probably need to reach out to Labor and Workforce. Here's their website. Here's a place where you can find out more information, etc. Right? And we're glad to do that. But yeah, that's it. So thanks.
One thing I want to say about any businesses, or if you are still considering setting up your business and have not yet set it up, and you have not been to the clerk's office to get a license yet, we are working so hard to communicate with the 95 counties and the 200 plus cities that administer business tax to communicate about this big new $100,000 threshold change. But if you've not yet obtained your license and you go into the clerk's office, just so you know, if you do not anticipate meeting that $100,000 return or threshold, go ahead and get a minimal license for now. If that changes and you make over 100 in gross sales, fantastic, good for you. You can switch to a standard license at that point and then have to pay business tax on it. But if you've not yet been in to get your license, just so you know, just let that clerk know I need a minimal license. I don't plan on meeting that $100,000 threshold. We are going to move into sales tax right now because we've still got a lot of content to cover. We'll shut down chat for just a few more minutes while we go over sales tax and F&E, and then we'll have another little short Q&A session to answer sales tax and questions about some other taxes. So let me scroll on through here to sales tax. This slide is a very basic overview of the way sales tax in Tennessee works. We could spend all day talking about sales tax, same with all of these topics, right? But we're just going to touch on the basics here and again point you over towards the resources where you can find out more information. So sales tax applies to dealers engaged in the business of making sales of taxable products and services in Tennessee. As I mentioned earlier, the retailers, the dealers are responsible for collecting this tax from consumers and remitting it on a sales tax return to the Department of Revenue. So what is subject to sales tax in Tennessee? Generally speaking, the sales of tangible personal property. I like to just think of that as things you can touch, feel, smell, hear. Sales of tangible personal property are going to be taxable unless specifically exempt by law. Sales are exempt if the purchase is made by an exempt entity. So a nonprofit, I saw a question in chat earlier about that. Do nonprofits have to pay sales tax on items? They do not. We actually had a webinar just a couple months ago about nonprofit entities. So if the product is exempt, certain healthcare products, Billy mentioned earlier, textbooks, certain products that are tangible personal property are not subject to sales tax. And then usage, such as manufacturing. So there are some exemptions to sales tax, to products, sales of TPP. Sales of services, Billy touched on this also. They're generally not taxable unless specifically listed by law or are part of the sales price. So just out beside that, taxable services include repair, installation, and cleaning of tangible personal property, and that includes software. Lodging services and rooms, short-term space rental for making sales, parking and storage of vehicles, a great section in our sales tax manual about taxable services, and a link here you can see a webinar that we put out about a year or so ago specifically about services subject to sales tax. So over on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see sales tax in Tennessee is kind of a two-part thing. There's a state rate that and there's a local rate. There are some special rates, such as on food and food ingredients, digital products, single articles, and more. Lots more information in our sales tax manual about each of the special rates. The resale certificate, we have mentioned this. Once you register for a sales tax account, you're going to receive a certificate of resale. It's going to be issued by location. So if you have multiple locations, each location needs its own certificate. These resale certificates do not expire, but are no longer valid when a location is closed. And the third bullet down here, very important. It's pretty cut and dry. This resale certificate can only be used for, just like what it says, items intended for resale. So let's say you're a business and you go to Costco or Sam's Club to buy a bunch of products. Some of them you're going to, you buy some cleaning products for your store. You also buy some products that you're going to be reselling, right? In a situation like that, items that you're going to be using, such as those cleaning products, those shouldn't be purchased using your certificate of resale. You're not reselling those, you're using those. Only items intended for resale. If you want to zoom in here, you can click the little plus zoom in button that's on your WebEx screen here to get a little better look at what a resale certificate looks like. If you are a business engaged in selling items, you will see people present these to you. You'll see people present agricultural exemption certificates, nonprofit exemption certificates. The thing I would caution you to here is just make sure that that it's in date, and you know, just keep that on file. You want to keep any exemption certificates on file for a period of time, because you may get audited, and it's very important that you just have that, any exemption certificates, that you keep those on file. So sales tax filing. Sales tax is due on the 20th day of the month following the period. So any sales made right now during the month of July, you would account for those on a return next month by the 20th of August. Now, most sales tax accounts are they're set up generally on a monthly basis. There's more about annual and quarterly filing on our website. If you don't meet a certain sales threshold, you can be a quarterly filer. First off, you're going to be set up monthly, though. And like we mentioned earlier, very important that once that account is opened, filing requirements begin. Even if there are no sales to report, you would just file 0, and you want to do that timely so that you don't end up accruing any penalties. For sales tax, there is no option for a filing extension. We've got some helpful resources here, some links directly to some helpful resources about filing. We've got a webinar on completing the sales tax return, and a link directly to that. I will let you know here in a few months, I believe October, we're going to be redoing that webinar because there have been some changes to the sales tax return based on laws. So tune in for that. I'll show you later where you can see what all the upcoming webinars are. We have a help video in our help section on filing the sales tax return, and pages 27 through 29 in our sales tax manual, information there about the sales tax return as well. So we are going to go ahead and move into talking about some other taxes, and then we'll have another little Q&A section for sales tax questions and for these other taxes that we're going to talk about, mainly F&E. Again, this is a basic overview slide. What is franchise and excise tax? It's a combination of two separate taxes. They're lumped together. Franchise tax is greater of net worth or the book value of real or tangible personal property that's owned or used in Tennessee. And excise tax is net earnings or income for a tax year. That equals F&E tax. As Billy mentioned in the first portion of this workshop, that this only applies to businesses that are registered or chartered with the Secretary of State as LLCs, corporations, so on and so forth. If you're a sole proprietorship, this is not going to apply to you. So just so you know, you're just on the hook for this through registration with the Secretary of State. We're going to go into a little bit more detail here in the next few slides about some information you see on this filing timeline. But this timeline is going to assume that an entity has a fiscal year end of December 31st, okay? The franchise and excise tax return is due on the 15th day of the 4th month following the fiscal year end. So for this example, that's going to be April 15th. By that date, you're going to, let me actually, since we got so much information on this, I'm going to actually point. How do I do that? Laser pointer. So right now we're right here. So file and pay that return by April 15th, or file and pay for an extension, or file and pay the $100 minimum. If you do file and pay for an extension, you get a 7-month extension. This is something that changed a couple years ago in our legislature. It used to be a 6-month extension, which puts you out till, in this example, would have been October 15th. Now that deadline is November 15th. If you have a valid extension, you can file franchise and excise tax by November 15th. Any CPAs on here, they loved that new law. So there are certain entities that are going to be required to make estimated payments. You can see here the dates for the estimated payments. We'll get to that a little bit more here in a minute. Who is liable? Again, all for-profit, foreign, and domestic entities are chartered, qualified, or registered in Tennessee or doing business must file the F&E return and pay at least the minimum tax due. All right, we're going to talk about the F&E filing extension. To receive that 7-month extension, taxpayer must have paid on or before the original due date an amount equal to or greater than 90% of the current period's liability, or 100% of the previous period's liability, or $100 if there's no previous period. The extension is automatic if the payment requirement for receiving an extension has been met and or a valid federal extension has been filed. More information about this in our F&E manual, pages 93 through 94. That minimum filing. So this comes about if you are wanting, if your business hasn't had any income yet, doesn't have any of the own any assets or anything, you're still going to owe that $100. It's a very easy thing to do. I've got some steps here. You click, this is through TinTap. If you're on our TinTap page, and we'll show you here in a few minutes how to get to that, you do returns, view file, view return links, and then under returns, minimum F&E tax, and then it walks you through some simple questions, some simple information, account information, a few questions here, and then you make your payment. Very easy. There's specific information about this in our F&E manual, page 159. Filing a minimum F&E return is easy. Filing a full F&E return is a little bit more complicated. All right, the estimated payments that I mentioned, taxpayers are required to make estimated F&E tax payment when there is a combined F&E tax liability of $5,000 or more after credits for both the prior tax year and the current tax year. Some more information about that in our manual, pages 109 through 111. But here are the dates. The first payment is going to be due on the 15th day of the fourth month of the current taxable year. The second payment, 15th day of the sixth month. The third payment, 15th day of the ninth month. And the fourth payment on the 15th day of the first month. Sometimes these are referred to as quarterly payments, but they're not necessarily quarterly if you do the math here. It's not quite every 3 months, but that's why we like to refer to them as estimated payments. Very important that if this applies to you, that you timely file these estimated payments, because if you don't, penalty and interest will accrue from the date that the estimated payment is due. All right, some other tax accounts. We've shown you the tax page over there where all the other tax accounts are listed. Lots of different state taxes and fees that are applicable to different types of businesses. Some major ones that affect you might be liquor by the drink tax, tire fee, motor fuel, tobacco taxes. And again, you can find lots more information on those, tn.gov/revenue. Click on that taxes tile or the taxes drop down, and you'll be able to link directly over to specific information about all the different tax types. And for a lot of these tax types, we do have manuals. There's a liquor by the drink manual. We are creating more and more manuals every day, some that are specific to certain industries, certain tax types. So we'll remind you again here in a little while how to get over to view all those different manuals. I want to spend 1 minute here talking a little bit about delinquencies. Penalties and interest do apply to any deficient or delinquent payments. So that means if you don't pay enough or it's delinquent, penalties and interest will accrue. A penalty of 5% of the unpaid amount is added for each month or a partial month, and there's a maximum of 25% penalty. Collections will be made on any taxes not filed and paid. So we have a webinar that we just did a couple months ago that's all about this collections process. I would recommend for any new business, established business, any people that are listening in right now that deal with businesses and help businesses to check out this webinar, because we go into great detail about that whole process. Bottom line is make sure you understand all your due dates, what's required to be in compliance, and then what's going to happen if you're not. The first thing that's going to happen if we do not get a return from you and our system is expecting it, is you're going to get a series of letters. First one is going to be, hey, we did not receive what we needed to receive from you. This letter is called a notice of proposed assessment. It's just going to have an estimated amount due. Some people think that's a tax bill. No, if you read carefully in that letter, it's going to tell you, hey, we missed a return from you. Or if you filed the return and didn't pay the correct amount, it's going to let you know that too. But if you get a letter that's called a notice of proposed assessment, pay close attention to that and deal with it. Because if you don't, then the next letter you're going to get is called a final demand letter, which means your account has moved into our collections department and you'll get a call from them. If your taxes are overpaid for any reason, the refund process is very simple on TINTAP, or you may want to, if you so choose, you can let that credit hang out in the account and it'll get applied to the next period. Pay close attention to that as well. All right, so now we're going to open up the chat again for any questions that you might have about what we just talked about, sales tax and any other taxes before we go into talking about all the different resources. So while I am going over to the website, my fellow panelists here, I just opened up the chat, so if y'all could help me keep an eye on that and see if any new questions are coming about based on sales tax information or F&E. Go over to the web browser. And just to show you again, tax resources, I'm sorry, we'll go over to the sales tax page. Again, you can get to it from this drop down, or you can click on the taxes tile. The sales tax page right here, lots of information here. You'll see this looks a little bit like that business tax page, but there's some more information about registration for sales tax. The local portion, single article sales tax. We have a webinar about single article too. If you sell high ticket items, that will apply to you. Information about exemptions, certificates, and credits. Marketplace sellers, a big topic there. Use tax, lots of great information on the tax page here. Again, you can get to our sales tax manual. The drop down under tax resources, click on tax guidance, tax manuals, and sales and use tax. Here is our wonderful sales tax manual. Lots of information in here. I'm just going to slowly scroll here just to show you that what all we have in this manual. I'm also going to take you over real quick here to the webinars page. I've mentioned that a few times. Go back to the top of, let's see, I'm just going to click on my hyperlink to the revenues homepage. This is tn.gov/revenue. Scroll down to taxpayer education and outreach. If you registered for today's new business workshop, you would have already clicked here and clicked on new business workshops, right? Well, over here where it says tax webinars, we do a monthly free tax webinar on various topics. You can see here the next one we have is going to be on our legislative updates. Upcoming webinars this month is legislative updates. Next month, information about this new business tax law change that we keep mentioning. In September, taxation of short-term rentals. We also have a new tax manual that's specifically for short-term rentals. Again, I just mentioned we're going to have another webinar. We're redoing the completing the sales tax return webinar in November, software as a service, and this is going to be a big one in December, updating your tax accounts. Lots of TINTAP help information there. Typically, these webinars are on the last Tuesday of the month. Just note here for that December one, because I know a lot of you are going to be interested in that one because that's a big topic. That last Tuesday of the month fell right in the middle of the holidays, so we moved this one up and it's going to be on Tuesday the 19th. Important here down on the bottom part of our tax webinars page, here is a huge, awesome resource for you, the webinar video library. You can see here we've got 49 webinars that we've put out here. You can search by topic. You can categorize this by different topics here. But you can click on the PDF of the presentation or the actual video by clicking on the hyperlink here. It'll take you over to YouTube and you can watch the videos. Do keep in mind that information presented in past webinar recordings is current as of the recording and may not reflect legislative and subsequent changes. We do try to, like, for example, for these two business tax webinars that we currently have, such a big change just happened. We do have a footer on the bottom of that one that says, hey, we've had a big change. So it links over to the important notice. But so always make sure that I'll just know that sometimes that content is no longer in date, but we'll redo webinars in time that really need to be updated. Just like I said, like our sales tax filing webinar is going to be brand new again in October. So let's see, guys, what's going on over in chat?
Well, a couple of things I was looking at here, some interesting questions, and I don't know. I guess we can kind of look at a few of these here too. One person is asking how they can change from a monthly sales tax filing to a quarterly. And probably the easiest way to do that is to either send us a email to revenue.support@tn.gov, which I've put in the chat as well, and ask for that change to be made. We have to look at how much money you're actually remitting and balance that against what our requirements are to see if we can switch that over. If we can, we will. I'd be glad to do it. You can also call our registration unit directly. Our registration unit's phone number is 615-253-0601. Again, registration is 615-253-0601. Okay, so something to think about there.
Billy, I was gonna. This was actually one question that I think you and me have encountered recently. Is if I paid sales tax on items that are resold, is there a place to get credit on TINTAP when filing the sales tax? And I think we actually had a situation like that earlier this week.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that by adjusting the way that you report that in your gross income, and then certainly using the Schedule A other deductions line for being able to back that away. That's very rare, a very rare occurrence, because typically what you're going to be doing when you're selling items is you're going to be acquiring your items using your resale certificate. And when you do that, you don't pay sales tax on them, which means obviously you do collect sales tax when you are actually selling them. So that's the way it happens in almost every situation. But we do have a way to accommodate that kind of thing, like you're saying, Mitch. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Also, Billy, that's a good question that we have here. It says, do you have to apply for resale certificates from every state, or could you use your resale certificate from Tennessee and be exempt from other states?
Well, I don't have an answer to that. And the answer to that is, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I don't work for the other states' departments of revenue. Okay. I can tell you what we do. We will accept another state's resale certificate and be exempt with that. So not, when I say we, I mean businesses in Tennessee. If you submit an out or get a resale certificate from, I don't know, Texas or something like that, then you as a business owner can honor that just like you would a Tennessee resale certificate. Fair question. It's just that we don't have knowledge of, the other states and what they do or don't do.
Billy and Katie, we had another question specific to CPE hours and if they receive those for attending today's workshop.
The answer to that is yes. For all of our webinars, you can receive CPE credit when you leave this workshop. There'll be a short survey that comes up. Encourage you to take that short survey. Let us know if you have any feedback regarding this training. But one of the questions says, do you need CPE credit for this? You just answer yes or no if you want CPE credit, and we will issue that. It gets sent out to the email that you the name and email that you registered for this webinar using.
I see another question. Somebody said if they may have called us and maybe the person they spoke to wasn't real sure about their answer, send us that email to revenue.support@tn.gov. And if we have to dig for an answer on that, we will. We may have to ask you some clarifying questions depending on what the question is too. But that may be a better choice for you. And again, not to discount what our folks on the phones do. They do a fine job. They work hard every day. But it's oftentimes when things are a little more complicated, we have to kind of look a little deeper, and that's maybe that's the better way to go. Would you agree with that, call center people?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sometimes, it really depends on the question that's being asked.
Right.
Some questions are extremely complex and they're going to have, maybe a multi-tiered answer. And sometimes those answers are going to be better to just have in writing, for the satisfaction of the taxpayer to make sure that they received good information. So it really depends on the complexity of the question, but we do have both of those resources, the call center and that email available for you with whatever questions you have.
There's a question here from Jack. This is a really good question. Working on projects in multiple locations in Tennessee, is there a simple way to pay business tax in a universal way instead of going back into each city or jurisdiction? Okay, so if you are business tax is a location-based tax. All right. Let's say for the scenario that Jack that you're talking about, you're working on projects in multiple cities. If you're a contractor, you're going to need to get set up with a license, depending on if you meet the threshold in the jurisdictions you're working in. That's for class 4 contractors. Same with short-term rentals, if you have short-term rentals in various locations. But if you are, that's considered a location. If you have a storefront over in Hamilton County and you've got a storefront over in Bradley County, that's location based. Let's say let's talk about this though. If you were just let's say interior designer or do computer, uh, uh, fix computers or something, you travel to different clients, different projects in multiple areas, you're still just going to be located based on where you're based out of. Your business license and your business tax sourcing is going to be based on your maybe it's a home address. If you work from home, you would not need to go get a license in multiple jurisdictions. That's only going to apply to certain industries like contractors. That's kind of a complex thing to go into in just 60 seconds, but hope
I
that.
have another question. It says, how do you pay sales tax for an event company when customers are paying in installments? Good question.
Well, the sale under state tax law is based on when the contract is made, as far as that goes. So when the money is received, if it's being received up front, then that's a little clearer issue. But technically speaking, it's due at the time that the sale is consummated. So it should come out of the first proceeds of the installments. Typically, we'll get involved with discussions about leases and leased property in the same way. There is a method by which you can remit tax on a per payment basis, but it is complex and ill-advised, in my opinion, to do it that way. It'd be better just to pay all the tax up front on the whole transaction and then not tax the subsequent payments.
I'm sharing my screen, the sales tax manual right now. I just typed in, this is a good example of checking the manual for a question here, because there's just so many different topics, so many different aspects to all of the different taxes. But just typed in the word, Control F, typed in installment. You can see here there's some specific information about rules for billing sales tax for installment or credit sales right here.
Mm-hmm. Yep, lots of stuff there.
So we are moving into, we'll go ahead and for purpose of staying on track here and on time, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to hand the reins over to Mitch to talk about resources. We'll go ahead and shut the chat down while we're talking about this, and we'll have some time at the end of the webinar here to address more questions. So Mitch, let's see here, hand the reins over to you. You got it.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So one thing before we dive into some of the resources that we have in this slideshow, I really do want to mention that Katie and Billy have done a really good job of including links to a lot of resources throughout this slideshow. After this workshop is over, of course, we've mentioned it in the chat a couple of times. A couple of people have asked if they can get a copy of this presentation. If you look through the presentation, there's going to be a lot of links that are sort of laid throughout the presentation, and each of those links will take you to a specific resource, whether that resource is a tax guide, whether that resource is a video, whether that resource is an important notice. It's really important to understand that we have a plethora of resources available to you, the taxpayer, or if you're a CPA or an accountant and you've got multiple clients that are asking you 1,000 questions. Resources are something that are extremely valuable, and we want to encourage each and every one of you to just be knowledgeable and be aware of all of the resources that we have available. Yes, Billy.
Yeah, Mitch, tagging along with that too, like somebody asked a question, is there a webinar or where can I find more information about how beer is taxed? It's
Right.
easy. The alcohol sales tax manual. It
Yes.
has every type of alcohol question you can ever imagine is answered in the manual. So
Right.
yeah, these resources are phenomenal.
Yeah, and I'm a little biased. I personally think that the Tennessee Department of Revenue does an excellent job with all of the resources that we have available. I think that our website, I would put it up to against any other state's website. I think that our team has done a really, really good job with organizing information and making these resources available to you, because we want to make this process of you filing and paying your taxes as easy as possible. And we understand that it can sometimes be complex, strenuous, stressful, but we want to know that we're here to help you guys. So probably one of the more important resources that we have available in the state of Tennessee, it is called TNTAP. Now, there was a question earlier in the chat of, what does TNTAP stand for? And I think Billy had mentioned it earlier. It stands for Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point. Okay, so this is essentially the place where taxpayers can access their tax accounts that they are responsible for as it pertains to their business. And we're going to kind of go over some of the tools that you have at your disposal within the TNTAP system. So one of the more important things that you can do is you can register for your tax accounts in TNTAP. That's a really important feature. And so if you do have any tax accounts that you find out that you need to register for, TNTAP would be the place that you would want to start. Okay. Electronic filing for all Tennessee tax accounts. This is really important. We do have some taxpayers that file by paper. They mail paper returns in and they mail their payments in. But we really want to strongly encourage as many taxpayers as possible to utilize the electronic filing tool that we have through TNTAP. It just makes the process a lot easier. It's a lot quicker. You don't have to rely on postage mail to make it to our office and to make sure that those returns get keyed accurately. The electronic filing aspect sort of empowers the taxpayer to take care of everything that they need. And so you can file any and all tax returns that you're responsible for in the state. You can schedule payments in advance. This is a really helpful tool. Sales tax, as Katie was talking about earlier, the due date for sales tax is the 20th of every month. Okay. But you don't have to wait until the 20th to file your return. You could file your return the very first week of the month and then schedule your payment to come out on the 20th. That way you can just be done with it. You can be rest assured that your sales tax has been taken care of that month. And hey, we want to avoid procrastination if at all possible, because we know what that can sometimes do. Automatic correction of common errors. This is a feature in TNTAP that I personally love. So if you file a paper return, you may make an error on that return, and then you'll send it in, and then who knows what all you have to do to get that fixed. Well, TNTAP will not allow you to file a return that has any errors on it. Okay, so if there's something that you've excluded from the return, there's a question that you haven't answered, it's not going to let you continue until you correct all of those errors. And we get a lot of phone calls in the call center where taxpayers get stuck on this. What TNTAP does is it will show you a red exclamation point next to any instances where there is an error on the return. And so if you are, if you've ran into this issue in the past, be on the lookout for some of those red exclamation points on the return itself. And once you get that corrected, it will allow you to submit that return. You can also amend returns. Sometimes taxpayers will make mistakes and they realize that they made that mistake and they want to know how they can change that return. You can amend any return that is that you have access to in TINTAP, and that's a really helpful feature. You can access past returns. So if you have, a long filing history, there is certain cutoff dates. Obviously, you can't go back, 20 years in the past and view those returns. But if you wanted to look at a sales tax return that you filed back in, 2022, 2021, and you had access to those tax accounts back then, you'd be able to view that return and see exactly what you filed. And so that's a really, really helpful feature in TINTAP. You can also access certificates and letters. Okay, so we send out, a lot of communication, a lot of important communication to you guys. A lot of these letters may be mailed to you, but a lot of them are going to be electronic communication. And all of that electronic communication is housed within the TINTAP system. And I'll show you a little bit, a couple of slides later on where you can view all of those letters and certificates. All right. And this image that Katie has provided us, this is actually an image of our home screen on our website. And if you notice, it says e-file and pay TINTAP in red letters. That's where you're going to go to navigate to TINTAP from our website. All right, so here is another extremely helpful resource. This is called Revenue Help. And we have got a lot of, I don't know the specific number, but we have a lot of Revenue Help Desk articles that we have created that we think are on topics that a lot of taxpayers have questions about. If you'll see right here, we have ones that are specific to TINTAP, all right? So general TINTAP how-to videos, how to create a logon, how to file your sales tax return, how to file your business tax return, logging into TINTAP, trying to gain access to another account. Maybe you're a CPA or an accountant and you have to gain access to a lot of accounts. We have how-to videos on how to do this. Gaining access as a third party, which that would be the CPAs and accountants. But we've got a lot of helpful resources on Revenue Help in the form of a how-to video. And so if you ever feel like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly, I feel like I'm running into some obstacles, I really encourage you to navigate to Revenue Help to see if there's a how-to video on the specific thing that you're trying to do. And more than likely, there is a resource out there that you can use. So I just want to make you aware of that resource that we have. We also have this feature called the TINTAP Assistant. Now, if you try to plug in an extremely complex question into the TINTAP Assistant, it's probably just gonna spit out the correct contact number or the email address that Billy was talking about earlier, where you can send us an electronic message. However, this can also be used and it can provide some helpful information on how to get a hold of us. It may be able to answer some basic questions, but you also have that available. And if you look on the screen currently, it is right next to the question mark there on the TINTAP homepage to the left. It's the little chat box. And so you can try to utilize that if you've got a surface level basic question or issue that you're running into. And just as the example there, it'll say, send us a message. That message, I believe that takes you to the link where you can submit an email to us. And then it also provides you a link for all of the revenue contacts. So all the phone numbers and things like that. So again, that TINTAP Assistant, it may not answer your questions specifically, depending on the complexity of the question, but it will provide you with some resources on how you can get a hold of us. And obviously that's the most important aspect of that tool. Moving on. So once you actually log into TINTAP, this is what the home page looks like. All right. And if you notice, each section that is circled is, it's a particular tool or it's a particular feature that houses really important information. So obviously, if you ever feel like you get lost in TINTAP, I always recommend clicking on the little house icon on the top left of the screen. That's going to take you home. All right. So if you feel like, man, I'm kind of gone down a black hole in TINTAP and I'm not really sure how to get out of here, you can always hit that house icon on the top left and it's going to navigate you back to the home page of your TINTAP. There's also some really important headers at the top. You've got the favorites, you've got the summary, you've got the action center, you've got the settings, and you've got the more tab. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of what these specifically mean in a couple of slides, but those are extremely important headers that house a lot of important information. The letters and certificates that I was talking about earlier, that is where you're going to go to access that. Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
So one thing I want to bring up here, you can see in this example, we've got Jim Jones Corp. That's funny. You see here the business tax account and the franchise and excise tax account, right?
Mhm.
When you first gain access to TINTAP, you're not going to see your tax accounts here, okay? You're going to take an extra step to go in and add access to them. Some people think, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know, why aren't they automatically there? That is on you to choose which tax accounts you want to see. It's not just CPAs wanting to see certain clients' accounts. Even if you are the master account holder, you're the business owner, you're going to need to add access. It's a simple process. There's a help video about it, but basically the information that you get when you receive a letter in the mail from us. So keep this in mind for new businesses setting up accounts. Once you have that letter from us, that'll help walk you through an easy process to get connected to those tax accounts in TINTAP. Or Mitch, Deirdre, I bet you get a ton of calls about this for new businesses and new. So we're talking about they didn't register. They've registered outside of their TINTAP account, and they get a TINTAP login. They get in here, and they're like, "Where are my tax accounts?" Right? Does that happen pretty
Correct.
often?
It happens very often, and I'm really glad
Yeah.
that you brought that up. You know, a perfect example is if you apply for a business license through a clerk, and you have not contacted the Department of Revenue at all, and it's a standard business license. All right, that clerk is most likely going to import that information to us, and it's going to create your business tax account for you. All right, but when you create your TINTAP logon, that account is not going to be immediately available. All right, and the reason why is because you have to gain access. And so I'm going to go back to the previous slide and show that we do have a how-to video on how to gain access to another account. All right, and so and this is just a security measure to protect, you know, you, the taxpayer, and your important information. We understand that, you know, you have multiple people that work within your business that maybe they have very specific responsibilities. Maybe you have an employee that works for your business and you don't want them to have access to all of your tax accounts. Maybe you want them to just have access to one specific tax account. Maybe it's a bookkeeper or something like that. So it's really important that you know how to gain access, and the information that you need in order to gain access to these accounts would just be your account ID. You would need a letter ID as well. Of course, any tax accounts that are registered for the Tennessee Department of Revenue, we do send out a letter to whatever mailing address was listed that has all of that information on it. It has the account ID, has the letter ID. You'll need that information in order to gain access to the accounts. Now, this taxpayer that we have as an example, Jim Jones Corp., they have access to their business tax account and they have access to their franchise and excise tax account. And this is essentially what this screen will look like for any tax accounts that you have access to. All right, so sales tax, it's currently not listed for this particular taxpayer, but you would see one that says sales tax. And then, of course, any other tax accounts that your business would be responsible for. Once you've gained access to that account, it would show up here. And as you can see on the right side, there's different options for each individual tax account. You have the ability to make a payment. You have the ability to view or file returns. And then there's also a link that says additional actions. And so that link is very important. That's where you can do other, you know, very specific tasks as it pertains to those tax accounts, which we'll get into those a little later. And then on the far right, where it's circled, it says manage my profile. This is also a really important place. Let's say, you know, you want to change your email address that's associated with your TINTAP account. This is where you would go. If you wanted to essentially make any changes pertaining to your TINTAP logon, any of those settings, that is where you would go to manage that. You would go under manage my profile. Moving on. So as I said earlier, a lot of those tabs up at the top, the favorites, the summary, the action center, these are really important tabs. They can house some really, really important information that you would want to be aware of. And how you access that information is by going into each of these tabs. The Action Center is a really important one. If you notice, it typically has a number at the top right of the tab. So this particular example, they have 3 notifications in the Action Center. And these Action Center notifications, obviously it's notifications that require action on you, the taxpayer. Now, they could just be letters that you haven't seen. So an action would be for you to access that letter and read it. But there also could be some payments that you have outstanding that you haven't made a payment for yet. Or maybe there's a return that you haven't filed yet. All of these things require action. All right. So anytime that you see notifications on the Action Center tab, you really want to click into that and make sure that you have everything reconciled and, just taking ownership of all of the important pieces of the various tax accounts that you're responsible for. As you can see, it shows that he's got a couple, this particular taxpayer has a couple of unread messages. These could be letters that, he's received, he or she has received, and they just haven't reviewed them yet. But he also owes a $15 balance on the sales tax specifically. It provides a link where they can make that payment for $15. And then, of course, it looks like they haven't filed their April 2021 sales tax return yet, and it provides a link for them to file that return. And so, again, if you see any notifications on the Action Center tab, I strongly encourage you to click into that just to make sure that you're not missing anything that's super important. The More tab. So the More tab is to the right of the Settings tab. It does have a little search box feature at the top where you can search very specific things. Let's say you wanted to, you've got a credit on your account, you want to claim a refund for it. You could possibly click on that and that will navigate you to, that particular feature. We've got a couple of examples here. So under the Additional Services section, we've got print certificate. I think that's what that says. Yep. And so if there are any certificates that you needed to print, if you needed to, request a refund, submit a power of attorney, any of those sort of additional services that not all taxpayers have to do, but may randomly pop up where you have to do something like that, this is a really good place to search. You also have the letters section. This is where you can view any letters that have been submitted to you from the Tennessee Department of Revenue. So again, an extremely important location for you, the taxpayer, and even CPAs and accountants for you guys to be aware of, because a lot of the communication that we send out, it's really important that taxpayers are made aware of all of the various changes that are being made to their accounts. I know that we've talked a lot about the new business tax threshold and how it has changed. We're going to be sending out a lot of important communication over the coming months pertaining to that. And so this is a place where you can go to access a lot of that information. If you notice on this screen, there's multiple tiles. All right, so on the top left, you've got Manage Accounts. This is where you can register for any new tax accounts that you may need. Hey, let's say you open up a new location. You can register for that new location. This is also where you'll go to gain access to an account. So like Katie said earlier, if you log into TinTap initially and you don't see anything, you don't see any of your tax accounts, you're going to want to navigate to that More tab and click on Gain Access to an Account and go through that process to gain access to whatever accounts that you need to have there. Let's see, the tile to the right of that is the payments tile. This is where you can request a payment plan. Maybe you've gotten a little bit behind on a tax liability and the amount is just a little too high than what you can handle. What will probably happen is that particular liability will fall into a collection case. And we have the option for you to be able to submit a request for payment plan. All right, and so that's a helpful resource. If you go down to the access tile, this is a really important feature. You can essentially, if you are the master logon, you can control who has access to your tax accounts. All right, so let's say you hire a CPA or an accountant to file your sales tax. and let's say you just no longer need them for whatever reason, you can actually go into your TINTAP and you can remove access from them since you no longer need their services. And so just be aware that you can have control over the access of your tax accounts by navigating there. Names and addresses, we get a lot of questions about, hey, my address has changed. You can manage all of your names and addresses. If you've changed your DBA for whatever reason, any situation that you find yourself as a taxpayer where you need to make edits to your names and addresses, this is where you would go to do that. We also have, it's a little bit cut off on the bottom, but if you look at that bottom left tile, it says submissions. And so this is one of my favorite tiles. A lot of times you as a taxpayer may forget that you submitted something. This is where all of your submissions get housed. So if you submitted a return, if you submitted a payment, this is going to show sort of a global view of all of the various submissions that you have submitted in TINTAP. All right, and it gives you, the confirmation numbers. It gives you the date when things were submitted, and so that's a really, really important feature as well. And then, of course, the last tile on the bottom there is revenue help. So again, that's just reiterating if you run into any issues in TINTAP or you're unsure how to complete something, that's a helpful resource there. Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I just made a note to fix this slide for the future to
No,
not
yeah.
cut off there, because you're right, that submissions
Yep.
tile is important.
Yep.
And I'll tell you where I've seen it come up before is, let's say you go in to file your return and you're clicking next, you're doing everything you're supposed to do, and next. Well, sometimes something might happen where you never actually submitted it. Maybe you
Yes.
just clicked save.
Yes.
Okay, there's a difference between save that return, and I'm going to come back to it later, or actually submit, making it
Yes.
official, right? This is where you can go in and say, oh, I didn't ever submit. I just saved this submission. So
Yes.
you see that come about a lot. I'm going to fix this slide though.
That is such a that actually is common. I think I had a taxpayer maybe a month or two ago where they were convinced that they had submitted their return, and after doing some research and checking the submissions, they never submitted the return. They just saved it as a draft, and they never fully submitted it. And the thing with drafts is, I believe they stay in the system for 60 days, and then once no action is taken on that draft, it just gets deleted essentially by the system. So anyways, the submissions tile there in TINTAP is extremely helpful because that's going to be a summary of all the submissions that you, the taxpayer, have submitted. So so that's TINTAP for the most part. We could dive into all the specifics, but if you guys have access to TINTAP, I strongly encourage you to just explore all of the various tools that you have at your disposal. Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, you're good.
Just want to remind everyone that the December webinar is going to be on making changes to your account, specifically in TINTAP. So we're going to go into much more detail about several of the things that Mitch just mentioned, such as changing your address, changing your email, changing who has access to your account. What kind of changes can you make? Certain changes you can't make in TINTAP. You have to actually start over in some way, shape, or form. We won't get into all that now, but for every new business, I would say if you can attend that December 19th webinar, do. But as always, we'll have all of our webinar. We record everything and we put them in our webinar video library, but that's going to be a good one that affects pretty much everyone. So
pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
Even if you're an accountant or a CPA, we have different access types. CPAs and accountants have a different access type than a master logon. And, it's just important to be aware of all of those different access types. And so that class, I'm glad you brought that up, Katie, that class is going to be extremely helpful. So if you feel like you run into some issues on, man, I just want to learn some more knowledge about how to navigate TINTAP and how to complete certain tasks, that'll be an extremely helpful class that you can attend.
We also have, since you mentioned it, I'll just mention there, if you're an accountant on here or a business that just wants to know about third-party access, we have a webinar that we did this last January called TINTAP Third-Party Access. So if that's interesting to you, go into our webinar video library and just search the word TINTAP and you'll see it there. We've got 3 different webinars that come up when I typed in TINTAP: navigating the website and finding information you need. There's a webinar on TINTAP basics. And then, like I mentioned, that recent TINTAP third-party access webinar.
Yeah, and we don't mean to overwhelm you guys, but we are serious. We have so many resources that are available to you, and Katie and Billy have done an extraordinary job of having all of those past webinars and having them recorded, and those are there for you, the taxpayer. And so we just want to make you guys aware that if you are running into an issue, there probably is a resource out there that addresses that particular issue, and we just want to make you aware that we have those available. Some miscellaneous resources that are at your disposal. We've got the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. This is a really cool resource. It's kind of similar to what Billy was breaking down at the very beginning of today's workshop, the new business landing page that we have, where it gives you step-by-step instructions on how to, register your business, start your business. This one it's a little different. It goes into some detailed information about how to structure your business, but it also breaks down on how to sort of structure your business model. And so that's a really helpful resource. I encourage you, again, once this workshop is over, download this PDF of this slideshow, and there's going to be a link that you can click on, and it's that Smart Start guide. Say that 3 times fast. That guide can be used, and it goes into some pretty good detailed information on when you start your business, that business model specifically, because starting a business can be a really stressful thing, and the more resources that you have available to you, the easier that process is going to be. There's also the Tennessee Small Business Development Center. So essentially, this is a network of centers that provide counseling and training. So they hire, I believe, volunteers to come, and you can be presented with possible mentors or counseling services. They can help you start your small business. And so they have a lot of free resources on the website, such as step-by-step business planning, a business planning workbook that you can access. So again, just laying out that process for you to make sure that you are just knocking everything off those checklists when you're starting a business, and making sure that you've got your ducks in a row. Another one is the SCORE Association. So this is where, again, you can access some expertise by various business counselors, advisors, mentors who offer free individual low-cost counseling throughout the U.S. They've got some online workshops as well on various topics. A couple examples here is the Startup Roadmap and Simple Steps for Exiting Your Business. All right, so if you're planning on closing your business, or maybe you're a partner that's wanting to leave a partnership or something to that effect, then the SCORE Association, that might be a helpful resource for you to navigate to. And then, of course, we've got the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov. They provide various guides, funding programs, federal contracting, learning platforms, and they also provide some local assistance as well. So these are just a couple of other miscellaneous resources that aren't necessarily administered by the Tennessee Department of Revenue, but we think that they're really important to include because they can assist you in opening your business or closing your business. Also, social media, it's a part of our lives, and it can be a really helpful resource. We, the Department of Revenue, have Facebook, we have Instagram, and we also have Twitter, and those accounts are handled by our communications team, and they do a really good job of trying to get important information out to you guys. And so typically, if we send out a really important letter that impacts multiple taxpayers, most likely a Facebook post or Instagram post or tweet are going to be submitted to get that communication out to as many taxpayers as possible. And so if you guys are on these platforms at all, I encourage you guys to like those profiles and give us a follow, because we share some really important information through those platforms. And then, of course, just the general resources on how to get a hold of us if you have any questions. tn.gov/revenue, that is just our homepage for the Tennessee Department of Revenue. If you want to send us any electronic communication, revenue.support@tn.gov, that's that email address that Billy was talking about earlier. So if you have a super complex situation or scenario, and maybe you just want to get an answer in writing just to make sure that you're doing everything correctly, you can always submit a question there. That team does a really good job of getting those responses out to you in a timely manner. So just be aware of that. And then, of course, if you would rather give us a call, you can give us a call at 615-253-0600. That is just our general call center line. And then, of course, we have different options for you of different like specific queues that you can go to. So if you have a very specific question pertaining to sales tax, there's an option specific to sales tax that you can click on. And we've got a couple other queues as well. Yes, sir. Yes, Billy.
So one thing that you might find interesting about our call center is that we actually answer the phone. Imagine that. So if you've heard about horror stories with other governmental agencies where you're on hold for long periods of time, generally that does not happen to us. Mitch and Deirdre and other folks in their units are very conscientious about answering phone calls very quickly. Of course, if you call on April 15th, I'm sorry, you're probably going to wait. So, file early, schedule your payment on 10-tap. That's another
Yes.
cool thing. Maybe we didn't touch on that very much is you can actually schedule your payment to come out later on and go ahead and file. And that way you don't have to do everything at the last minute, which is phenomenal. Something to think about here too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
If I can just piggyback on that, Billy, and then I'll pass it on to you, Katie. If you do call into our call center and the call times are pretty high, it's probably because we've sent out some type of communication to a high volume of taxpayers, and multiple taxpayers are reaching out to us. And so during those times, please be patient with us. We will get to you eventually. But we just want to make you aware that we really do try to answer all of those calls in a timely manner, and our goal is to help you and give you correct answers. And so, but yeah, Katie, I'll pass it on to you.
Sure. Thank you, Mitch, for all that information. Chat's open now. You may have seen that already in there. We've had it open for a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these. Donna has asked, if you register a business and then go back later to make your business an LLC, what do I do? That's a great question, Donna. It's not uncommon. As your business grows, you may want to change the structure. So the simple answer to this is, if you're going to change your structure, you do need to close out your business as it currently is and then open back up under your new structure. So I'm going to take you over to our website real quick. Hold on, Billy, you've got, while I'm
Yeah, while you do that, Katie, let me point out something really important. So yes, what you just said was absolutely right. You've got to close out those accounts that you might have set up, say, as a sole proprietor, and then you set up new accounts as an LLC. And the reason we do this in this particular way is because an LLC is its own legal entity under the law. Okay, so we tax the LLC. Now, you as the person who's over the LLC, yeah, get your money, right? But at the same time, the tax paying entity is actually the LLC. So that's why we have to do it that way. Now, also something really important is just because you switch over from one to the other, and I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, does not mean, oh, well, I don't owe anything else on my other ones because I closed them. No, if you have delinquencies, if you have an unfiled return for even part of a year for business tax or sales tax or whatever you're doing, yes, you do have to file the final returns. Okay, so just remember that just because you're switching does not solve your problems. You've got to tidy up as you walk out the door and close everything out on one side and then reopen on the other side, kind of fresh. Okay.
We've got a resource on our website. This is the revenues homepage, tn.gov/revenue. And under the How Do I drop down, these are pretty much our top 10. I don't know how many links there are here, but our most important questions are the majority of the questions that we get. So one of those is closing out a business. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here. Close a business. So this is for if you're closing out, you're just going out of business, or if you are changing structure, same thing, because you're going to look at that the same way. Like Billy said, you're going to close out one to start another. But this link takes you over to detailed information about how to close out each one. And in a nutshell, what Billy just said, yeah, you're going to file a final return, even if it's midway through the year and it's business tax that's not due till next year. You're going to go ahead and close everything out by filing that final return, closing the account. That closing an account is something you can request to do in TINTAP. If you haven't filed that final return and fully paid for it, though, it's not going to be completely closed, even if you request closure. But this page will take you to links that specifically will walk you through how to close that account. And on that note, I will say that this is important. If you are buying a business from someone, it behooves you to make sure that they have closed out all of the tax accounts in their name. Let's say you're just taking over a business. It's all already there, but you're a new entity, right? So that entity that you're buying the business from is going to need to close everything out properly. And if they do not, it can fall onto you as the new owner. You may find yourself responsible for taxes that they didn't pay, and then you're going to get lawyers involved and all kinds of stuff, and it's not going to be pretty. So my advice there would be, if you're buying a business, taking over a business from someone else, verify that they have closed out their business and have them provide you with everything to prove that they have closed out that business. An important thing there. Let me get back over. How do I do this? What do I do? Oh, go back over here. So some other questions that we've got in the chat. So Kendall has said, if you file 0 on a business tax return, do you need to also file a sales tax return? That's a little bit of a loaded question. It depends on if you have a sales tax account. If you do, now here's the deal. You've got to think about each of your tax accounts as standalone tax accounts. They really don't have anything to do with each other. So if you're filing 0 on a business tax return, I'm assuming that you mean, Kendall, that means you did not have any gross sales. You're just filing 0 on it. Okay. Do you also need to file a sales tax return? If you had 0 sales, yes, you need to go in and file 0. I hope that makes sense to you. They're just, like I said, think of it as totally separate. We're not going to assume, the Department of Revenue is not going to assume that because you had 0, you filed 0 for business tax, that you also don't have any sales tax filings that you need to do. Treat them separately and go in and make sure. And again, on TINTAP, hopefully you have access to all your accounts, and you'll go in there and see. Just go in and file 0 on both. Am I missing any questions in here, guys? Let's see. We've had so many questions in here. I could go all the way back to some of the earlier times where we had to end
Hey,
the
Katie,
Q&A.
I'll mention one. I thought somebody had a really good question that's not really related directly to us. I just thought it was kind of interesting. This person said that they hired what they call a 1099 employee. So let me just tell you about that for a second. First of all, that name 1099 employee is not a thing. Let me tell you why. For federal tax purposes, and we're not really talking about federal taxes here today, but I will tell you, the IRS considers people who work for you to either be employees or independent contractors. Okay. So the general layman's definition of an employee is someone who is subject to your will and control. I think is what it says under their law. So you have to withhold taxes for them, for their payroll and all that kind of stuff, for Social Security and for federal income tax withholding and all that. They're an employee. That's what I would call a W-2 employee, if you know what I'm saying. They get a W-2 form, right? a 1099 contractor is someone who is doing something for your business, but they don't actually work for you as a quote employee. All right. So you can't really call that person a 1099 employee because that's not a thing. Okay. You can't do it. So you're one or the other. And if you're not withholding taxes on them personally, this person's question was, well, we withhold 30% and just pay them the difference. Well, that's not a good idea because you need to pay them exactly what you're contracted to pay them for. And then that person who is an independent contractor has to file as a self-employed person with the IRS. Okay. And then you file your taxes as you would for your business and all that too. So that's where this is a little bit outside the taxing part of what we do. But this is where these organizations like Mitch was talking about, like SCORE and Small Business Administration, and even the IRS, at irs.gov has a lot of information too about stuff that I'm talking about here too. So just keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways to think about this stuff, but I've heard of different businesses at different times get into a lot of hot water about treating people as independent contractors when they're truly employees, and you really want to be very, very careful about that. Okay, so I just thought I'd bring that up. Thank you, Katie.
So I see a question that came in earlier. I registered my small business at the beginning of this year. However, I haven't started selling anything yet. I tried to go online every month to click on Zero, but not successful. So, and that's from Azeb. I'm assuming you mean for your sales tax account. This could be a variety of reasons. The first thing I would tell you to do is to make sure you have gained access. When you say you've gone online and not successful, make sure you have access to your sales tax account. Okay. If you don't, Mitch told you earlier, showed you how under TINTAP you click on more and then manage accounts, gain access. We also have a great video in our great steps and a video in our revenue help TINTAP section about gaining access to an account. It could be that that's what you're talking about. I'll go into another scenario here, but if you need help gaining access and can't do that, just call our call center. That's something that's very common that we help people with every day. Just make sure you have access to that account. So if that's the case and you didn't have access to the sales tax account through your TINTAP logon yet, and you opened your sales tax account months ago or at the beginning of the year, like you said, there's a good chance that you're going to see a pretty hefty amount of assessments there if you've not been filing the Zero, though you're trying. So at that point, what you would do would be to go in and file Zero for each one of those, and they'll show up in that action center as action needed. File January sales tax, file February, file March. Anything you haven't filed will show up as an alert. As a matter of fact, if you start at the beginning of the year, you probably most likely would have already gotten some correspondence from us, that notice of proposed assessment or NOPA letter, and it might have a really big amount on there, because when we don't receive anything over time, those assessments get bigger and bigger. Those are just estimated amounts. Don't freak out. If you haven't been selling anything, you just need to go in and file the return as zeros. I will say though, at this point, you would have penalties assessed for each month where that was delinquent, and that's where a penalty waiver is an easy thing to apply for on TINTAP. There's directions on how to do it on our help article with directions. I'm assuming that's what you meant, that you're not successful with clicking on Zero. Billy, you've got something to add to that?
Yeah, I do. What you just said was absolutely right. Zero returns replace assessments, which takes care of that issue. Yes, there's penalty involved. You can apply for penalty waiver, right? But at the same time, excuse me, you're filing zeros, and you keep filing zeros, and you keep filing zeros, and you keep filing zeros. Why do you keep filing zeros? Do you need a sales tax account? The answer may be no. Why are you registered for sales tax if you're never going to collect? So if that's the case, we need to close the account. Now, the thing is, after a while, we go back and we look at sales tax accounts that are filing zeros always, and we will close them. Okay. So we're not going to do that forever and ever. That wouldn't make any business sense for us to keep accounts open for no reason. So we're going to close them down. So make sure you're registered for a good reason, and that don't need to go ahead and shut that down immediately as well. So that's one thing to think about there too. I want to address a question that Brad had here in chat. It says that he was unable to register for business tax in TINTAP. It says because I gross less than 100,000. Well, the answer is no. That's not the reason. There's got to be some other reason. I don't really know what the reason is that you're encountering an error, but the other part of that is I'm glad you're encountering an error, because why would you register for business tax if you're going to gross less than $100,000? You don't need to. Okay. The only thing you need to do is get a minimal activity license, assuming that you had at least $3,000 in anticipated sales, right, or gross receipts, and get that from the county clerk, and if in the city too. Okay. So that's what you do, Brad, is you need the minimal activity license or licenses as far as that goes. Now, let me also say this, as part of our planning or changes to different things, we are discussing how we're going to change the TINTAP registration for business tax to actually ask a question of our taxpayers to say, hey, are you going to gross more than $100,000? And the answer yes, then they'll be allowed to proceed to register for business tax. But if you answer no, then we're going to tell you stop, don't register for this tax, go to the county or city. Okay.
Billy, you just said something that made me realize there's a topic we didn't touch on during this workshop yet, which is
There can't be,
registering.
Katie. We've talked on everything. Let's be
Everything. We've
honest.
touched everything. It would take a whole week, or probably a whole month.
What is that
Um,
topic?
Okay, so let's say you've gone to your county clerk to get a standard business license, which we're going to speak moving forward as if that's for assuming this new $100,000 threshold. You've obtained that standard business license, whether you start at the city, start at the county. We have touched on this. They share that data with us. What I don't know if we have specifically mentioned or not yet is that once they share that data with us, once you obtain that standard license, that actually registers you for business tax. At this point in time, the way things are currently, once you obtain a standard license, and that's, you know, the systems speak, and you are registered for business tax, you would find that out by the fact that within a few days of getting that standard business license, you'll get a letter from us that says you're now registered for business tax. You didn't physically go in and do the registration for it. Getting that standard business license did it for you. It created a business tax account, and that is something that can be very confusing for all of us, to be honest with you. And also, you know, when we talked earlier about, somebody's telling me that I've got static in my headset. Talked earlier about keeping your information consistent. One thing that I have seen, y'all, is that you go to the county and you get your business license. And let's say you register, you get registered there as a class 2 with business tax, with business license, class 2. And then you go to the city and they register you as a class 3. Pay attention to this stuff. You may not even realize that happened, but what just happened is that you've got a duplicate account now. And I don't mean to overcomplicate things. My whole point being just make sure that your information is consistent. I was dealing with a taxpayer just a couple weeks ago that for some reason the county put the address different on their license than the city did, and boom, we had duplicate accounts. So just real important that things stay consistent with that. I wanted to go back really quickly to the question about filing zero on a sales tax return, because we've brought that up numerous times. I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm on our webinars page, and I'm going to scroll down to, it was a sales tax webinar, completing the sales tax return. So I'm just going to go over to that PDF because I know that I have a slide in there that shows this. Sorry to be scrolling fast. Hopefully I'm not giving you whiplash here. So once you log in to start filing, the first question is going to say, will you be submitting your file provided by a software vendor? If you've got point of sale software, that might be common. But the very next question, after you click on the location ID, the location for the return you're wanting to access, it says, do you have any sales to report for this period? Yes or no. This is where if you do not have any sales to report, you click no, and then okay. And then the next, I don't know if I have a slide about this. Nope. The next question will say submit. You need, like we said, you need to make sure you submit. Don't just save that. Submit. Click submit if you want to make sure we get the filed return. But that's how simple it is. Just a few clicks to file a zero return. So
And Katie,
that's the steps. Yeah.
I think it has you typing your password to confirm that you're filing,
That's
and
right.
then after that, a confirmation page comes up.
Mhm.
And what you want to do is you either want to print that or write that confirmation number down, just in case there's a question about it. But that's the end right there. That's where you know that you have the checkered flag, so to speak, and the race is over. Okay,
Right.
you're good. But if you don't see that confirmation number at any particular point in what you're doing, and not saving a submission like Mitch mentioned earlier, then you want to, you want to go back and look and see what you did, till you finally complete everything you need to complete. I think there's been a lot of good questions. You know, somebody asked, it says that their license says one thing, but the 10 tap says the legal name. That's very common. As far as that goes, it's not a big deal as far as that goes. The DBA name versus the legal name displayed on 10 tap, no big deal. We're just basically wanting to make sure that we have you in the computer right now. When you file your returns with us, typically when you are on the filing screens, the DBA names will show up there.
Especially if you're a
that would be
sole proprietor. If you're a sole
right.
proprietor, your 10 tap name, your legal name in our system, if you're a sole proprietor, is your name.
Right.
Uh,
Jane Doe, John Doe, whoever, right? And then under where you're filing, it might say Doe's Restaurant or, whatever your name is that you're operating under,
right. And if you have a question about that, just to verify that because sometimes it could be the case of maybe we've got 2 accounts for you or something. When in doubt, call us. That's a pretty easy thing to check on
Right.
with us.
And when you
Just
see
verify.
something, right, when you see something goofy, either on 10 tap or you get a weird piece of mail, that's when you start taking action, not 6 months from now. I hate to sound like I'm preaching to you. I don't mean to, but its problems are better solved when they're done, in a matter of weeks as opposed to a matter of months. Okay. And I know you guys are busy. Believe me, I understand. I get it. But
Well, we see the
it's a lot.
aftermath, right, Billy? We see those collection cases that are just painful to even see because
You
we think,
know,
oh,
honestly though, Katie, too, and I know you've seen it too. I can't stand to see people go to collections for things that have absolutely no reason being there, because there's not really truly money owed. It's just that someone registered, they kind of forgot about stuff, they kind of went on and did something else with their life or whatever. But yet, here's a bank levy, and we cleaned out their checking account. Not great. That needs to not happen. Okay. But honestly, no offense to our good businesses out there, that's kind of the taxpayer not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We're here to help you, but you got to help yourself first. Okay. So that's it.
I
I'll
worked in our
stop preaching now, I
collections.
promise.
I'm about to preach on you a little more then on that note. After working in our collections division for a time, I will tell you that the vast majority of collections cases come about for 2 different reasons. One, a business closed, but they didn't close out correctly with us. Just not aware that they needed to, or didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. That's one reason why cases show up in collections, because our system, you're closed, you've moved on, you're living in Florida now, whatever. we somehow don't know that you're closed. So our system is just expecting to keep seeing that return coming in, and it's not. So then it falls into collections. Maybe you've moved on so much so to where our mailing address is even wrong and you don't even know. You didn't even get these letters, or stop
Right.
mail or whatever. And the other one was I saw this all the time. That's why we've mentioned this several times. Opened a sales tax account, but you haven't started business yet, and you're not filing those zeros. Those snowball real fast and end up in collections. So two
Yeah.
things there. The vast majority of all business owners, you want to do things right, and that's why we have these events. It's because we're trying to help you figure out all the ins and outs of all this. And,
Yeah.
there's some people that
One other thing, Katie, and we mentioned this very early on this morning, and it probably bears repeating one more time, is when you're start talking about your structure, your sole proprietor, your LLC or whatever, so you have this business idea and you come up with this idea, and maybe you're going to make $1 billion. So if you do, that's great, because guess what? We'll make a lot of tax off of you. But anyway, that's the kind of problem you want to have, right? But what you want to do is you want to make sure you think through every single thing of what you're doing before you register for your tax accounts. Okay. So if you have this great business idea, have you really thought it through? Have you talked to other people that do this sort of thing? What's your market look like? Did I go down to the small business help center? Did I go and talk to a bank? Could I get a loan? Do I need a loan? Do I have a business plan? There's many questions to. Once you get all that, then it's time to start getting a business license and setting up accounts and stuff like that. But if you just have an idea sitting around on a couch one night, that's great. That's where a lot of good businesses are born that way. But then you forget about it, and you're like, oh, well, I took another job and I got busy or whatever. And then all of a sudden this avalanche of paper has been started for really no reason at all, So fantastic.
we have pretty much reached the end of this workshop, and lots of information we threw at you all, lots of questions in the chat that weren't general enough to get to at this point, or maybe you were replied to directly from Deidre or Dan or another person on this panel. If we did not get to your question, either check the resources or send us an email or call our call center. The information's right in front of you here. Again, want to refer you to our webinar video library and also the upcoming webinars that we've got. Go register for those, and we hope to see you again. We also are open to your suggestions for what we need to hold webinars on. What do you want to hear about from us? So on the survey that you're going to take as you leave here, I see some questions in here. Repeat the CPE information. Okay, perfect. You're going to get a little survey as soon as you leave here. Give us feedback on there, and that's also where if you need CPE credit, you will answer yes to the question on the survey about needing continuing professional education. That's what that
Right, and
stands
then we
for.
email that back to you, and then that's your proof that you attended. Right.
That's right. That's right. Well, Billy, Deidre, Mitch, Dan had to scoot out of here, but thanks to all of you all for joining us on this panel. It was a fun morning, lots of information. We could have kept going for days and weeks on all this, right?
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
But,
you all. Reach out to us. We hope to hear from you, and good luck with your business.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a
Thank
good day.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
y'all.